Everyone for tuning into yet another episode in which I talk about issues related to public transport. Uh, Now that I think of it, I've talked a lot about American issues because I essentially work in the United States. I mean, I telecommute, but I work for about issues of American public transport for the great majority of it, or about issues of Europe, and it's usually either Europe writ large, so things like pan-European intercity rail or issues like that, or sometimes specific things about Germany and Berlin. Um, I don't think I've talked very much about Britain. I think I have a video about the Elizabeth Line Crossrail, but not about Britain's ongoing high-speed line, which is called High Speed 2. So just as some background, I want to show you guys a spreadsheet. Um, and the spreadsheet is going to have a very weird title, so there's a better way to look at the spreadsheet and to look at the data viz. And this is here. So we do have a little database of construction costs of high-speed lines, and we can readily see that high-speed 2 where's high speed 2 on this? I know high speed 2 is on this. It's a wandering lines challenge. Where's country UK? Here. So this started on my need to change. Yeah. So this, in case it's unclear, is the most expensive in our database per kilometer. There are some things. I mean, there's some Chinese lines that are more, but these are often short or mid-length regional lines. So it's things like it's little intercity railways that are more expensive, but it's because they're fundamentally regional railways. Um, the core the core intercity Chinese lines um, are maybe more expensive than France or Germany, but they're a lot cheaper than this. Um, there do exist other not very good things, like the most recent uh, Shinkansen line, connection of the Hokuriku line to Tsuruga. The Dutch line is actually bad. It is this one, High Speed Rail South, the Taiwanese line. Um, but High Speed 2 sits in its own comfortable spot, uh, well ahead of all of these things. And this has been a perennial problem. Note that High Speed 1 here was also almost the most expensive in Europe, maybe the most expensive in Europe before it opened. And it gets to the point, the High Speed 2 is 500, I won't say 530 kilometers, but we will talk in a sec about how how it's been descoped, and I think it's less than 530 at this point. Uh, the projected cost is in real dollars, 120 something billion. With inflation since then, it's about 140 billion, 2022 dollars. And then the important thing is that we can compare this with the cost of everything built in uh, Germany to date. Uh, this line was under construction when we started. It's currently open. Uh, this is not all inflated to the right year, so some of these costs need to be substantially inflated. But for example, the biggest ticket item barely does. This should be about 70-ish, 75 to date. Uh, all this is all high-speed lines built in Germany to date, and what of all lines built in France to date? I think they're going to go over. Uh, this is it's going to be reverse chronological. Yeah, all of France is going to be the sum. I can't tell if you can see it. It's 90 billion. Uh, but this includes uh Lyon Turin, which is only beginning construction, which is 33 billion because it includes an alpine base tunnel. You can see how tunnel heavy this is. So without that, only stuff that's um, open. So this also means not Bordeaux Toulouse, which is also somewhat drunk in its cost, is 46. We can do the inflation adjustment, and from 2009ish, there would be about 60. Yeah. The point I'm making is that every line built in Germany to date, all of these lines are open. They're about 1,000 kilometers here. Should be more, but not the topic. The topic is not how Germany scores up, it's how the United Kingdom does. In France, a network that currently is 2.5 thousand, add them together, 3.5 thousand kilometers, that's about the cost of high speed 2. Um, and I think Britain is aware that they're having a cost problem. The costs not only are high in connection with high relative to those of um, the rest of Europe, but also the but also relative to recent estimates. So the estimate that I just gave you in this uh, is from. I mean, we can look up the source. It's the Oakervy review. It's the Oakershot review. So it's the so what this means is that this is from a few years ago. They're already complaining that there's inflation, which there has been. I can't actually tell whether Britain is like the United States, in which in which budgeting is done in nominal dollars, because it would be pounds, or like most of Europe. In France, for example, budgeting is done in real euros. So all of these reports would have a little, not suffix, um, a little index at the bottom, a little where it's going to be where they say what year it is. So it's going to be euros of, let's say, 2012. And if there's inflation, that's not a cost overrun. That's just the value of the euro changing. Um, but at any rate, because of the mounting costs, they're drastically cutting scope from high speed 2. So high speed 2, and you might need to edit the thing. Uh, high speed 2 uh, used to be scoped from London to the most important bit is to relieve the West Coast main line. Britain has, so Great Britain has four main lines. I mean, it has more, but the four most important intercity lines are the West Coast main line is the most important, most congested. All of these four lines, as you might expect of such a capital center country, get to the capital. Uh, the most important is this one. You can see it in red. It's the West Coast main line. I should also add, for people who are maybe used to an American line where it's the Northeast Corridor, where it's one line and everything, or a German line where it's one line and everything, British lines have thickness, especially the West Coast main line, because there are a lot of little bypasses, all of which are counted as part of the West Coast main line system. So maybe the red bit that you see as high speed is the most bypassy thing. So this is the West Coast main line. There's a loop here because of Northampton. Um, there's originally it went from London to Birmingham, and then subsequently in the railway mania they built this bypass to get to Manchester and Liverpool faster. This bypass at the time was a basket case because ridership was rather local. One of the problems that led to the no, it's not an asterisk. Um, it's a sub. It's a sub. It's this. It's a sub index. It's like when you do this in a series. Um. By the way, okay, I'm not talking about California High Speed Rail. California High Speed Rail is not even in our database, which I think we made the people running it mad when they asked us about it, and they said that it looks rather paused to us, so we're uncertain about the costs, and I will, on hindsight, kind of defend that, even though we did burn goodwill. Um, when we said that maybe a year and a half ago. Not a year and a half, a year and a bit. Okay. I think it was late 21. But anyway, so the West Coast Main Line, so the railway mania, so 1840s in Britain, there was a massive expansion of railways. Uh, they didn't go bankrupt, but they had way lower profits than expected. Britain was also not a very high profit country, unlike the United States. Britain did not have a population explosion, raising population by 30% every decade. I mean, Britain did have a population, right? I mean, uh, I don't remember the Scottish numbers. I think England went from 8 point something to 30 million people in a century with net immigration to, let's say, Canada or Australia. The United States had net immigration, but most of the uh, increase in population from 5 point something million in 1800 to 76 million in 1900 was just combination of high birth rates and unusually low for that time child mortality rates. But anyway, so the point is that Railway Mania disappointed. It was a huge bubble. I recommend that people read this guy. He is a math professor uh, who, not Railway Media, Railway Mania, who, out of I don't know, an obsessive interest in railways or something, wrote a long monograph about the Railway Mania. Uh, so the issue was that ridership in the 1830s and early 40s exceeded expectations, but it was much more local than expected. So passenger miles and revenue were about as expected. Ridership was higher, so more people rode shorter distances. This was not understood in the 1840s, leading to the construction of very fast lines that bypassed a lot of cities, and it took generations for them to become really useful. Maybe not generations, decades. I would say. By the 1870s, I think it was all fine. Anyway, so this is the Trent Valley Line, the Birmingham bypass. Um, and there's the lines to Manchester and Liverpool, and then a bypass between them that gets you up to Scotland. We can go to either Glasgow or Edinburgh. I think trains alternate between Glasgow and Edinburgh. That's the way to get between London and Glasgow. Edinburgh was always a competition, east-west, east versus west. I think the east was faster. The second most modern line is Stuff Said in Common. Subscript, thank you. Subscript is what I meant. Script was the word that I was missing. Yeah, by the late 19th century, the US advantage over Europe disappeared. In 1900, for example, the lowest child mortality country in the world was Sweden. No, I do not actually want followers or chatbots from you. This is and then I wish for less spam. Uh, Correct. The United Kingdom also, something that I should say, because Britain was, as mentioned, a low growth by American standards, high growth by most other world standards country. Uh, it built lines to very high standards. The United States did the exact opposite. So most of the lines were fully grade separated from the start. London was already building an elevated line called the London and Greenwich between London Bridge and Greenwich in the 1830s, and running trains there every 20 minutes, making it, by some definitions, the first urban rapid transit line in the world. And it was built again. I think it opened in 1838. The historic rapid transit timelines are specifically 20-minute frequency, and therefore, the London map does include, in the 1840, it already includes Fenchurch Street and London Bridge. I guess maybe it wasn't Fenchurch Street, but Tower Gateway or something. And note that even before the tube opens, there are a few lines, and even after the tube opens, quite a lot of lines depicted so are not the tube. Alexander does not care about whether it's steam, diesel, or electric, just off-peak frequency and the presence of many stops. Like enough urban stops qualifies an urban line. Lines were built double track, mostly straight because it was unclear that the curves would not derail the train. extremely gentle grades. The first line, the Liverpool and Manchester, was built to something like 1 in 3,000 or 1 in 4,000 gradient, with one section of 1% that was hauled by cable. There were tunnels on those early routes, uh, and there was so much traffic. Part of the reason they were double track is they didn't have good telegraph yet, but also they needed a lot of traffic. Uh, so anyway, West Coast Main Line, East Coast Main Line, second most important line. It passes through not as populated areas. Peterborough is not most important town in England, but then it gets to Yorkshire. That's the line that serves Yorkshire. Sheffield. You would not go to Sheffield on the East Coast. You would get to on the third line, which is the Midland, via Leicester, via Derby, Leicester, Nottingham, Sheffield, Leeds. But you would use the East Coast to get to Leeds. It is faster than the Midland. Uh, it used to get to York and then past York to Newcastle and Scotland. Then there is the Great Western, which is going points west. This would be Bristol's, I think, the main ending point, but then there's a branch that lets you go to Cardiff and then South Wales, and then to the southwest of England. Four main lines. Uh, the West Coast is the most important because it connects London to the most important second cities, which are Birmingham and Manchester. Beyond Birmingham and Manchester, I don't know, it's maybe Leeds, Sheffield, Liverpool, Bristol, but because these are the two most important, um, and they feed the same trunk into London, this is the most congested line. Uh, yeah, in rural areas there were no in rural areas there were still cuttings. The fatal accident on the day that the first railway opened was in a cutting in a rural area where where the train was delayed by so many hours that people were trying to get out of the train and I think climb the ridge out of the cutting or something like that, and then they got hit by a train. Um, Even outside the cities, there were cut and fill. When did they finally stop doing cable climbs? I don't know. I'm just giving the railway history background because I think it's important. And so the thing is, this is a four-track line. I think it's four-track up to maybe Preston. Maybe if not, if I'm wrong, then it's four-track up to Crewe or something. But these are separate tracks. So in practice, there's always four tracks, which is maybe it's going to be two serving a city and two bypassing it. And but this is still congested. The issue is that traffic. So if you look at how much traffic is run on the West Coast Main Line and you compare it with the capacity of a four-track railway, it is not a lot of traffic. However, it's facing the same problem that was facing the Tokaido Main Line in the 1950s and the um, Paris and the Pavillon Marseille line in the 60s and 70s, which was there's a mix of speeds on the same line, even with the four tracks, just because often the four tracks are two here, or something like that, and there are stations on the bypasses, then it means that trains of different speed classes must share the same tracks, and this wildly reduces capacity. This is also a problem that we have in Germany, where so the busiest intercity link within Europe is the high-speed link from Paris to the bifurcation that splits into the main line that goes on to Lyon, or a branch getting to the old PLM line, this one, to Dijon. However, a close second is in Germany between Frankfurt and Mannheim, which is about to get treated with the high-speed bypass, just because partly because this line is not very fast. I think it's going to cut maybe 15 minutes or 20 minutes. But importantly, this is also the second busiest in Europe, not far behind Paris to the bifurcation, and because it's called the Riedbahn, and because the Riedbahn has different speed classes on it, uh, it gets 6 trains an hour in each direction, but even that is congested because of this mixture of trains of different speed classes. Even when the trains on a section are the same speed class, the system is so open, much more open than, for example, even an open high-speed rail system like the TGV, where the Shinkansen is closed high-speed rail. The Shinkansen doesn't even run on the same gauge um, as the rest of the trains in Japan. So a Shinkansen train, for the most part, just runs on Shinkansen tracks. And yes, there are two exceptions called mini Shinkansen, but two exceptions. Um, and then everything else stays off the Shinkansen. The TGV, and even more so the ICE system in Germany, are very open in that a train uh, and that the trains run through to slower lines. But even in France, which is a very open system, for the most, first of all, on a high speed line, all of the traffic is going to be TGVs, with the exception of the RGV, which is uh, regional trains that piggyback a little bit on the high speed lines in Nord-Pas-de-Calais. But other than that exception, it's mostly just fast trains, and the fast trains um, are kind of scheduled to prioritize being fast rather. Yes, they do constantly run off schedule when they go on slow lines. I don't think I've ever seen the train be on time between Paris and Nice. This is 250 kilometers of slog in the Riviera. But the but even so, it's much more controllable than than on a line that's not even high speed, where you can have anything. Uh, where delays can propagate from far within the country. Um, the so what do you mean software for tracking? Oh, passenger freight. I mean, in Britain. So bear in mind, Britain has even less freight than the rest of Western Europe. Like Britain has basically no freight. Um, I mean, it's an island. It's a small country, so and the competitive advantage of trains is over the long haul. You see this, for example, in the U.S. The short haul regions, let's say the Northeast, on the East Coast doesn't really have a lot of rail freight. It's more of a truck country, and then the transcontinental stuff, everything from the interior to the coast, just from Florida to New York, that is rail country, and the same is true in Australia. So the big railway networks, the big workhorse rail networks for freight are Russia, China, India, and the US. So continental scale countries. The EU does not do that, and this is not the topic of this post why the EU has not done that. But Britain, which is an island, no. Um, it's not just sacrificing capacity. I mean, there's very little the UK could have done that would have preserved much freight rail. I mean, they could have preserved more, but it's just horrific geography for freight. Uh, and so the Tokaido Shinkansen and the LGV Sud-Est were both built partly to relieve capacity crunches on these lines, where even when there was only maybe an express train per hour or a couple express trains per day, the scheduling, certainly based on how they knew how to schedule in the 1950s and 60s, was very delicate. And yeah, maybe they could have invented the takt early, but there would still have been an hourly train an hourly express train from Paris to Lyon and point south. There are something like 10 or 12 trains per hour on this shared section, on the LGV Sud-Est. Now, France, and we're going to get to Britain, which does the same thing. France doesn't do turnover. It's not the Shinkansen. France does not do one line that just has stations on it. It's all on bypasses. It's all on little bypasses. It's all on little spurs into city centers, often terminals. So if you try to check timetables, Paris to Lyon, I think it peaks 2 or 3 trains per hour. Maybe two to the city center, maybe another two to the airport, and then the airport trains keep going south, maybe to Montpellier, maybe to Marseille. Uh, Trains go to maybe they go to Chambéry or something, maybe to Grenoble. Uh, and it's like all these little things where often it's less than a train per hour from Paris to, I don't know, Saint Etienne or something, and then they combine on this trunk to 10 or 12 trains per hour. Uh, Whereas the old express trains, they weren't like this. The old express trains was maybe a couple trains per day that would just be the express train that gets you from Paris to Dijon, Lyon, Marseille, Nice, maybe. Um, so the capacity crunch is why Britain is building high speed too, not just speed. The speed gains, especially from London to Birmingham and Manchester, are unimpressive. Uh, Oh, you mean they're not in a single track, but they're close to each other? Oh, not quite. So there are four tracks that are actually the same track bed. There are sometimes two and two. So this is an example of two and two. It's building a loop. The two and two are often the worst for capacity, and the reason is that they have different sets of stations. Um, the Lee Valley lines, for example, have this two and two system, and because there are local trains on both, it's harder to just do two dedicated express tracks. Um, but anyway, so they're building high speed two. It's a very good idea that they're building it. It's a really bad idea that they're only building it now. They should have built it 50 years ago. You can even see the under construction bits of it. The problem is they're building it way too late. Because they're building it way too late, the benefits are immense. This is a line that stands to have more ridership than the LGV Sud-Est. I mean, think about it. London is a little bigger than Paris. Birmingham is bigger than Lyon. Manchester is bigger than Marseille. No, there's a lot of stuff on this connector that is not just Lyon and Marseille. It's stuff like Valence, Grenoble, uh, Annecy, Genève, Dijon, Caen, Saint-Étienne, Avignon, Nîmes, Montpellier, Toulon, Nice. But I mean, there's also stuff that would be behind the West Coast Main Line. So, um, for example, again, it's Liverpool is important. Manchester, Crewe, Preston, they're right on the main line. Uh, just ignoring the eastern branch of the Y that they're descoping. It used to be that the plan also included, because there's no good east coast to west coast connections. There's an east west. There are east west railways, but they're not very fast. There's this plan to do high speed two with this kind of Y system, so that people would be able to. So it's a Y system that would get people also to the East Midlands and to Yorkshire, and the lead section just has been descoped to reduce costs. Uh, I wouldn't say it's even value engineering. They're not actually engineering away the really expensive ticket items. Like, first of all, the tunnels, the rail turns are already being built. They can't not build them anymore, unfortunately. They have giant stations we're going to get to because of the rumors about the line being cut from Euston. And so the so they're reducing scope, but they're not really value engineering as far as I can tell. And then Birmingham has like I think £1 billion new station. The issue is that they think that the stations themselves are also at capacity. So even though it's supposed to be an open line with lines running through at lower speed, for example, to Scotland, uh, they need new stations, or so they think. And the upshot is many billions of pounds are being spent not on the high-speed tracks but on the stations, which is not something that is done in France or Germany. It's not really done for the new Shinkansen lines. I guess they expanded Tokyo Station when they built it in the '60s, but subsequent increases in traffic have not led to this. And since the '90s, they've just made the station operations more efficient, and this is the issue. So there are rumors. So I'm here to talk about rumors about are the trains going to hit Houston. They already descoped anything beyond this East Midlands Parkway, which is this weird. It's this weird station that's supposed to be a compromise. Which is supposed to be a compromise between, I believe, Derby and Leicester, and Nottingham. So the East Midland Parkway is supposed to be some kind of compromise between these three cities, uh, and the and so this leg is not going to get built up to Leeds, and there were rumors in the Sun that they would also not go all the way to Euston, that they would only terminate at Old Oak Common, which is a station that is the connection between High Speed 2 and Crossrail. Now, the Sun, as a newspaper, to the extent it's a newspaper, exists mostly for the um, sensational reporting that is considered to out there and too yellow to make the Daily Mail. Uh, and so it's been clarified that no, they're not going to actually scrap Euston. So the rumors were that they were not going to go to Euston. They were only going to go to Old Oak Common and then make people connect to Crossrail. Uh, this is, if it sounds like a daft idea, it is because it is. And it's right here. And so, no, bear in mind it's an idea that has been done before. It is not, I mean, I'm sure that the sun, I mean, I'm sure, my understanding is the sun doesn't literally make things up. Someone tells them something might happen and they go with it and say it will happen. Like, I don't think it's a fake news site in the sense of the Pope endorses Trump fake news. They just have no standards. Honestly, it's mostly also true of the Mail. In Japan, uh, there's a Shinkansen system going south of Tokyo, which was an immediate financial success to Shinosaka and then to Fukuoka. The north of Tokyo system went different. It opened as two lines at the same time in 1982, going up to the main line, the Tokyo main line, went to Morioka, which and then it went up to Niigata, and so it's the Tokyo and the Joetsu lines. Now the Joetsu lines, because you might say that they literally have to drill across the spine of the mountains, this would have been very tunnel heavy. Also, Niigata, not that big a city. Things in the middle, not very big. Essentially, it was just a subsidy to the region that the prime minister at the time came from. But worse, the line didn't actually go to Tokyo. The line only went as far south as Omiya. This station. And it did exactly as poorly as you would expect. In the 1980s, the line was considered an example of Japan National Railways over-expanding aggressively and building unprofitable lines, rather than just Tokyo to Shinosaka to Fukuoka, to Hakata, I guess, which was it's the same city. It used to be two cities, Hakata and Fukuoka. One was a commercial city, one was a samurai city. They merged in or after the Meiji Restoration, and I don't remember which was which, but the agreement was the city would be called Fukuoka, but the train station would be called Hakata or something. So from Omiya, it's much more complex to build down to Tokyo. Within 3 years, they do manage to extend down from Omiya to Ueno here. So within Tokyo, but just outside central Tokyo, and even at the line kind of disappoints. In the 90s, they finally extend down to central Tokyo, to Tokyo Station. There's no through service north and south of Tokyo, but this is central Tokyo. You can switch. Not actually many people do. The ridership on the through Shinkansen, which again are not through trains, you need to switch trains, is not actually high. But this is central Tokyo, lots of jobs, way better rail connections than Ueno. And the line, and this was also after the breakup of Japan National Railways, lots of restructuring and better efficiency. So, so at this point, these lines are financially solid, but they weren't until they got to central Tokyo, and this is really important. Now, the French lines don't run through either, but they don't go. I mean, they don't go to, but they don't go to the equivalent of Omiya or to the equivalent of Old Oak Common. Where do they go? They do go to terminals that are not within the central business district. France does have central business districts that are not La Défense. Paris has one, which is right here. It is around the Opera. It is a mid-rise, but fairly job dense, if not central few square kilometers of Manhattan job dense. Central business district. Saint-Lazare is there, but most of the actually not most. There's no TGV at Saint-Lazare right now. Saint-Lazare serves suburbs and smaller cities, nothing big enough to merit an TGV. I think they're planning one, but honestly, they shouldn't do that. They should do other things. Gare de Lyon is not in city center. Neither is Gare du Nord or Gare de l'Est. Neither is Montparnasse. But Paris was designed for this. This has been the situation since the 19th century. They've built the the city's job geography around this understanding. There are six main train stations. Um, so the jobs, even though there is a central business district, there is more leptocratic uh, job distribution. It's leptocratic. The other one, platycratic. Leptocratic would be America. So low kurtosis job distribution. That is to say, uh, lots of commercial development in near CBD neighborhoods. For example, Bercy is right here near Gare de Lyon. Uh, the Tour Montparnasse is right here. Montparnasse. Um, a bunch of things at Gare du Nord and Gare de l'Est. Moreover, the metro was built with the understanding that people would be using it in part to take the train, to take to take the metro from the train station to their to their onward destination. So there's very good service at these stations. Gare de Lyon is a transfer between lines 1 and 14, between metro lines 1 and 14. If you walk a little bit, which probably are not if you're having a lot of luggage, but you can if you want, there's also metro 5. Uh, and Gare du Nord is the intersection point between 4 and 5. Gare de l'Est 4, 5, 7. Montparnasse 4, 12, 13. No, not 4. Yes, 4. 4, 6, 12, 13. Uh, in Saint-Lazare, it's 3, 12, 13, 14, and things are connection to 9 as well. So lots of lines serve these stations. The RER is designed, it serves not Montparnasse, but the others as well. So it's an urban rail system and a job geography that are both designed around the understanding that passengers get off trains from the rest of the country at Gare de Lyon, at Gare du Nord, at Gare Saint-Lazare, and so on. Now, is London like this? So first of all, is Tokyo like this? Not as much because the trains would just go to Tokyo. Is London like this, like Paris? The answer is absolutely. London, like Paris, has historic train stations. Um, and so why did they build the first, not first rapid transit line per Alexander's database, but the first actual subway? Why did they build it? Because people only got off trains at Paddington, Euston, King's Cross at the time. I don't think Marylebone existed at the time, and St Pancras didn't. St Pancras opened around the same time the tube did. And at the time, the Midlands was a branch of the Midlands began as like a feeder railway into the West Coast and to the East Coast, and then it decided for prestige reasons it needed its own main line into London and its own station on Euston Road, right next between King's Cross and Euston. And so people got off their intercity trains, which were the only way to travel between cities, this being the 1850s. And then they needed to switch to a cab, a horse-pulled cab, to their final destination, which was in the city of London, here. And the roads were congested with this cab traffic. It was really hectic. That's why they built the tube. The tube is, like the metro, designed with the understanding that there is no London Hauptbahnhof, just as there is no Paris Hauptbahnhof. Whereas there is a Berlin Hauptbahnhof, there is a Tokyo Hauptbahnhof called Tokyo Station. So the trains are designed to efficiently connect to these main terminals. The first line, the Met line, literally the first section was built between Paddington and Farringdon. And so Euston is not quite in the central business district of London, which is the city, or at this point, the area around Oxford Street, so stuff like Oxford Circus here. Oxford Circus being the busiest station on the busiest underground station that is not a train station, because the train stations are where people change. I mean, some people just work near the train station, but for the most part, it's just people changing from mainline train to the tube. There are jobs near Victoria, there are jobs near Waterloo, but not that many, especially not near Waterloo, compared with usage, and the same is true at King's Cross and Pancras. So anyway, Aux Circus is number one. Ferry transfer between the Central, the Bakerloo, and the Vic. And number two is Bank. Four-way transfer between Waterloo and City. Northern, um, Central, and third, its connection to Monument District. And so the system is designed so that it's okay if the trains only go to Euston, or if they only go to Waterloo, so the early Eurostars went to Waterloo at low speed, kind of messing the capacity of these lines to the southeast. Then they needed to go to a place, and they worried that they didn't have enough train platforms at Waterloo. Yeah, Waterloo is used. It's just that Waterloo, um, it's just that is not, uh, Waterloo is not a job. I mean, there are jobs here. I'm trying to remember which big tech firm is at Victoria. It's not Google because Google is near St. Pancras, but there are jobs here. This was a very popular location when this station opened in I think 1862 or something. Or 1860 something at any rate. This is not one of the oldest stations. The oldest would be Waterloo, London Bridge, Waterloo, Euston, Paddington, Fenchurch Street. And so the point is that the system is efficiently designed around passengers getting off at Victoria. Maybe not Victoria because these lines are really overcrowded, but Euston, pretty good. King's Cross, St. Pancras, maybe even Paddington, Waterloo, um, maybe Charing Cross, Blackfriars. However, not Oak Common, not Old Oak Common. That is on the fucking moon. Um, it's designed. I mean, yeah, Crossrail gets there, but it's just one line Crossrail, and it's one line where there's also going to be um, a lot of traffic. The part of the issue is that the peak of intercity rail travelers and the peak of local travelers coincide. Ideally, you want to have a country where the peaks don't coincide. New York is such a country. The reason is that in New York, there is a New York Hauptbahnhof. It's called Penn Station. And this means that, if you allow me to get away from our program and get to New York for a moment, in New York, the issue is that the peaks. I mean, technically, the peak coincides because of this tunnel, but that is because of the North River tunnels. But that's eventually going to get relieved. Whenever they actually bother opening Gateway. Another of these really important projects that should have been built decades ago, and now it's too expensive. Costs chasing benefits is a big problem, but the issue is that the people who get Amtrak peak into New York, it might be morning rush hour. If you're trying to do some kind of long range commute, Philly to New York or New Haven to New York. I mean, probably if you did New Haven to New York, you would do Metro North, but Philly to New York, let's say. And then probably you would get off at Penn Station and walk. And if you can't, yeah, you might take the subway, but the subway, because this is literally within Midtown already, the subway peaks getting into Midtown. So let's say you're going to take the E train. It's this line. The E train peaks going from Queens to Manhattan. The peak congestion point is between when it departs, I think the last stop in Queens, which is Court Square, and its first stop in Manhattan, which is 53rd and Lax here, and then it gets less busy. And the E doesn't run through to Brooklyn; it only runs through to Lower Manhattan. So if you're getting off at Penn Station and you're going north, this is basically free capacity. Now on the commuter trains, I actually know this. So you might know there are two subway lines, 8th and 7th. 7th is more useful. I think the skew is 2/3 of the passengers want 7th and not 8th. But even that's also true on the 7th Avenue trains, the 123. So the one is just never that crowded in Midtown. The one is local, so people just switch to the express. If you're going to Times Square, you would take the one. If you're going to 50th Street, you would take the one. If you want to go to Columbus Circle, you would take the one. If you want to go downtown, you would take the 2-3. But the 2 and 3 have done are the most crowded going from 72nd to Times Square. So, when they go south of Penn Station, this is again not going to crowd the subway and the big. And I mentioned before the commuter trains across the tunnel are rather crowded, but they're crowded by American commuter rail standards. They're not crowded by British commuter rail standards or by American subway or by New York subway standards, which are up there as well. Um, this is a freebie, which is you can try to plan things this way based on station siting, but mostly it's just what has been done, what was done 100, 150 years ago. New York happens to have drawn a good card in the deck. I mean, poker is a game of skill, but it's helpful if you just drew two aces. Britain did not draw two aces. Um, Not on station siting. And this is especially true for stations where they need new lines because the new lines are going to be built where there's the capacity crunch. Um, and Crossrail is being built so for the capacity crunch going from points west and points east. Um, so Old Oak Common would be the same capacity crunch as people from West London going to their Central London jobs. It's not this kind of weird. It's already within the city, within city center, so it's after the biggest tidal wave of peak traffic has left the train already. No, this is not how this works here. This is kind of how it works at Euston, thankfully. Uh, what do you mean empty? Oh, Metro North. There was never an attempt to merge them into the subway. There was through running between the LIRR and the Brooklyn L's in the 1900s and early 1910s, and this was ended in, I believe, 1912 when the ICC, currently the FRA, um, the rail regulators, said that they should stop doing that because trains and L's run out of time. In the 60s, because I know there were more recent plans to merge Metro North and the LIRR, but keep the subway separate. I know that SEPTA had plans to do the merger, which the surgery succeeded, but the patient died. It's kind of what happened. But anyway, in Britain, there are terminals that have capacity. And by capacity, remember, the important thing that I'm going to get to in a sec is not how many tracks the stations have. All of these stations, maybe not Charing Cross or maybe not Charing Cross or Cannon Street, but honestly, they're not as important. Or maybe Blackfriars, which is through a station anyway. These stations all have spare tracks for mainline trains by Japanese standards. The real capacity crunch is on the tube. The real capacity crunch is, are you dumping passengers on an overcrowded tube line where the only relief, London, doing an amazing job at operations. Do you want to talk about how amazing London does operations? The Vic, the Victoria line, runs a train every minute 40 seconds at rush hour. It's not automated. I think there's one other city in the world that does something like that, actually, a little better, which is Moscow. And then there are some systems that do a minute 30 or a bit better, but I think it's all just with automated trains. Paris does a minute 25 with automated trains. This is a minute 40 without. I mean, very advanced signals, but no automated trains, and also a lot of tidal traffic. There's kind of weird thing where if your train gets overcrowded, you can't run as much traffic on it, so your capacity actually falls. It's similar on the highway. So as speeds fall on the highway, the capacity increases. Essentially, as more cars get on the highway, and I'm saying highway, so motorway or long arterial, not city streets. As more cars get on it, the speeds will fall. But that's okay because you are still squeezing more cars on the highway. Again, we're talking highway engineering. We're not talking green politics for this section. So you're squeezing more cars at the expense of lower speed, which is a trade-off that usually you should be willing to make. Um, but at some point, this relationship breaks down, and you can, and it gets to the point where lowering the speed actually reduces your capacity because of stop and go traffic. There's something similar to that with trains, where if the train is too congested, then it takes passengers way too long to get on and off the train. The dwell times are going to be too long, and one of the inputs to the capacity, to the minimum headway between two trains on a subway or on an S-Bahn type system like Crossrail, is the dwell time. If your dwell times grow, which can be because the trains don't have enough doors, uh, it can be because the train interior layout is not optimized. In Paris, they try to optimize bi-level trains for this high throughput. So the RER-A has uh, extremely wide doors, uh, which is not unique to them. The bi-levels, the high floor bi-levels in Switzerland, they too have massive. They have these massive doors, but there are three pairs of doors per car. This is non-existent outside Paris. This also means that these trains are bespoke and too expensive. Uh, and because it's such a busy line, and because Parisian construction costs are much saner than those of London or New York, the premium on these trains would have paid for a relief line. But that's beside the point. The point is that these trains are designed to not even do normal bi-level, where it's door, upper deck, lower deck. It's door, upper deck, lower deck, door, upper deck, lower deck, door. Um, and you might notice these are some massive doors. They're 2 meters wide, or 210. You can see them at platform scale here as well. And so these trains still have a dwell time problem, even with these massive doors, and this is because the internal staircases on the train uh, limit them. This is why I keep saying that you should not run bi-levels on busy urban lines or urban commuter lines, even though it's tempting. At some point, it's kind of like there are too many people there, therefore there's less capacity. This is a problem that London has to a worse extent than Paris. And yes, Steph is right. Dwell time is, I should say, it's almost more important. No, yeah, exactly. This is what the RER-A should do. They should run trains like the RER-B trains, except with less obstructed corridor between the doors. Uh, the RER-B is single level, 4 doors per car, but not very well optimized. Yeah, exactly. Not just Hong Kong. Tokyo essentially runs all the urban commuter lines with subway style seating, and and only the green cars are run with 2 and 2 rather than sideways facing seats, and the green cars are also bi-level, but they're rationed by price. The Berlin S1 actually, or the Munich S1 is a good compromise. I mean, you sit facing front and back, not sideways, but there is enough space to move around the train, and there are many doors, not many cars. There are also many cars. But anyway, no, Tokyo subway trains. Oh, 65. Sorry, I saw 85, and no, that is incorrect. Yeah, exactly. Um, but anyway, so bear in mind, Euston and King's Cross um, are not on overcrowded lines. The London Underground is not overall at capacity. Sections of it are. Which sections? Let's recount them. The Waterloo and City, uh, the Vic going north, not south. So I actually know a couple very middle class in the British sense, um, who specifically decided to buy a place. I think maybe actually in Walthamstow, or if not, then in the same area. Like the idea is that they should be on the Vic going north, and they picked that specifically because, as I mentioned before, the Vic has amazing service. A train every minute 40 seconds at rush hour. I imagine they work um, West End and not City, uh, and the crowding is south. On the north, if you're from the north side, you get this amazing frequency, and you actually have room to stand. I don't think you have space to sit, but you have standing space. Going from the south, you don't. So it's this section, Vic from the south, Waterloo and City, Central from the east, uh, and I think Northern to Bank from both sides, maybe. Uh, no, the thing is, Euston is on what? So Euston is on Bank branch of Northern. Uh, it's a reverse branch point between them, but um, it's also on Vic North, Met, and Charing Cross Northern. So a bunch of lines that get you to your London destinations that don't peak the same time. Yeah, exactly. The tube also is a tube. They built because they invented the TBM. The tunnel diameter is small, uh, and you can even see this is how the train looks. Maybe the scale is unclear, so this might be a little clearer. Just looking for a, we can check the rolling stock, 1995 stock. You can start seeing how cramped it is. Um, these are the smallest trains. This is the smallest loading gauge in the world for a standard gauge train. This width, this height. I think, actually, let me check something. I think the Berlin U-Bahn might actually have uh, narrower trains, but they're taller and they don't do the thing where it's claustrophobic because the ceiling curves over you. Uh, yeah, the trains in Berlin are even narrower, but they're taller, so it's not actually claustrophobic to sit inside. Uh, yeah, it's narrow gauge now. Yeah, no, narrow gauge things uh, uh, are narrower. Likewise, the I want to say that the narrowest loading gauge for a broad gauge train is maybe the Delhi Metro, which is, I want to say, about the same size as American mainline trains or something. And then most broad gauge trains are somehow wider, like uh, the Indian, the mainline Indian loading gauge is massive. It's like you can fit three and three. It's basically the size of a. It's basically the width of a narrow body mainline jet. It's 3 meters 66. I think 737s might be 370, and they need more. They need thicker walls. So anyway, Houston is a really good location. King's Cross, St. Pancras, same thing. Lots of lines is an important thing. These lines are mostly not at capacity. Um, Again, Bank might be, but the worst are Waterloo and City, Vic from the south, and Central from the east. Uh, Generally, stuff from the northwest is not at capacity. There are just more lines built there. I won't say it's about rich people, poor people. Also, generally, stuff from the west is less crowded than from the east. Also, same thing in Tokyo. Right? The worst Tokyo crowding is from working class eastern neighborhoods. But it's not exactly. I mean, Waterloo and City is an extremely posh line. The reason it's so crowded is it's mostly bankers, so the line doesn't have a lot of ridership. It's just that all of that ridership tries to get to Bank in the same half hour. Um, and so, and let's not forget, ridership on high speed rail is middle class. It is going to be my friends my friends in Walthamstow or other Londoners I know who live who walk to who live maybe I think they live in Camden and work at Google. It's people like that. These are your ridership. It's not usually the sort of person who is actually poor because they can't afford high speed rail fare, or the sort of person who lives in Essex and earns an income about equal to the national median, but still believes themselves to be oppressed by the elite, where the elite, this person living in Essex, is probably not actually wealthy people, but people who are queer or immigrants. Uh, Yeah, the fact that India hates its broad gauge is a problem, but we're not talking about the failures of uh, India today. We might want to do this next time, but or at some subsequent time. But we're talking about the failures of the country where which shares an important piece of history with India. Much of Indian history is displayed in its museum. Uh, Something that is true for both Britain and India. Just as for both Britain and Greece, much of Greek history is displayed in its capital. What do Britain and Greece have in common? Um, People in chat, feel free to remind one another why the pyramids are in Egypt. So anyway, so London Euston is actually a really good location. Uh, it's not the only one. I mean, St Pancras is good. I mean, the difference between Euston and St Pancras is not important, and to the point that the plan for for Crossrail 2, which is currently paused. I mean, technically cancelled, but not permanently cancelled. Like, I don't think they're scrapping everything. The safeguarded tunnels, for example, are still, I believe, safeguarded. Um, is to have one east-west station for one end at Euston, the other at St Pancras, with connection onward to King's Cross. King's Cross and St Pancras have the same tube station. Uh, I think at one point it was the busiest in the system. I think maybe this one it's behind Waterloo and Victoria or something. I don't remember. And yeah. Okay, so because you're not saying this in chat, the reason the pyramids are in Egypt is that is that they were too heavy to drag into the British Museum. But anyway, the so the point here is that trains need to go to Euston. Now, do they have to go to Euston as opposed to St. Pancras? No. I mean, if for some reason it would have been better to serve St. Pancras, they shouldn't have been skittish. It should have been okay to serve St. Pancras, even though it's not the traditional destination to the northwest. And for the record, I don't think they slavishly picked Euston just because it's the traditional destination for the northwest. Um, the issue is that they believe they need new tracks. Again, we're going to go over in a few minutes about why they don't. But their belief is they need new tracks, and just as a very maybe abstract thing for people who are have I don't know some kind of interest in like that kind of I shouldn't say rationalism because I'm not a rationalist and I'm not a rationalist and I think that um, people act in accordance with their beliefs, and this means that I'm about to critique the British belief that Euston, that in fact all the terminals in Britain need capacity, but they hold that belief and therefore make plans assuming this belief is correct. This is also why you have this really weird ass um, routing of High Speed 1 that instead of going to where you would expect trains going southeast of London to go, which would be something like London Bridge, um, instead it crosses the Thames and there's a lot of tunneling involved so that it can enter London from the northeast. And part of it is to help to do some urban renewal in Stratford. Uh, Stratford is one of these locations that is very favored for urban renewal. The reason is that it was historically industrial. It's right on the other side of the river, so there were London metropolitan pollution controls that stopped at the river. Stratford was on the other side, so lots of industry right there. Um, it was also a very good near London location for I think it was the Great Eastern. So lots of rail workshops. So lots of factories, therefore goods yards, workshops, rail maintenance shops. The heavy maintenance facility was here, I believe. So lots of gritty industrial stuff that didn't need to be there once Britain moved past the Victorian era. Um, a lot of deindustrialization, which is often just efficiency at this scale, and so lots of empty land that was redeveloped. Oh, this was also true around the goods yards for King's Cross and St Pancras. The neighborhood that gave the world the word gentrification, Islington, is right here, and this is partly just because they redeveloped the goods yards that were no longer necessary because maybe the people didn't need coal haulage from coal fields into London for heating anymore. Um, and this also meant that there was less pollution from coal burning. So this area was no longer very dirty. Uh, so anyway, they built this tunneling through Stratford. I think Stratford is not tunneled, everything else is tunneled, to get to St. Pancras. Why? Because that was the only location where they thought they had enough tracks for the needs of Eurostar. Eurostar is poorly run. Eurostar consumes way too many tracks because of security theater and border controls. Um, and this is actually really bad because with the security theater and the border control, um, the all of these combine add around half an hour to the trip time. This is half an hour standing in line, not half an hour on a moving train. So it's worse than half an hour on a moving train. Moreover, the system breaks down precisely when there's the most demand. I saw hour and a half delays both ends when I did Paris to London and back in the summer of 2018, so peak travel season. Just because the just because I think all the all the lanes on the at the border control queues were occupied, so just very long lines, and and uh, and they thought they needed that because of British security theater paranoia, and the result is that they went to an intuitive terminal where they had more space. Why did they have more space? Because St. Pancras is not as important either a domestic intercity or a regional terminal. Um, and so King's Cross uh, serves the East, not the East Midlands, would be St. Pancras. It serves part of the East Midlands. It serves Yorkshire, Edinburgh. Uh, some commuter trains as well. St. Pancras, some commuter trains as well, but the commuter rail um, is just Thameslink is the most important. They're also just non-Thameslink, but Thameslink has kind of taken the sales, I think, out of Bedford, something like Bedford or St. Albans uh, to the terminal tracks. Yeah, there's intercity trains, but it's not. But none of these things like Nottingham is, I'm sure, nice. Leicester, these are on Birmingham. That's on Manchester. So Euston is more congested. Paddington congested with train launches from Bristol, but from let's say Oxford. So Oxford's not very big, but it's close by, so it generates a lot of short range traffic, which is why they need to put to connect the two local lines, which are usually called the slow lines, except on the Great Western they're called the relief lines. Normally it's fast and slow lines. Here it's main and relief. They had to connect them to Crossrail for capacity. But St. Pancras had spare space. Euston is being picked not because of spare space, which they believe they don't have at any of the stations, which is why they want to expand Euston. So they believe they need to expand the station. Where would they expand? They would expand the one station that has no historic protection. Why does it not have historic protection? Because they did what New York did to Penn Station, and they demolished the historic structure. So this is a 1960s. So they demolished this and this in order to build this. In order to build, they have a good maybe this. Um, Let's compare that with how St. Pancras looks. It has two typos, of which one Wikipedia will fix the American dot. Okay, they're not showing the pretty parts of St. Pancras, which bothers me greatly. Yeah, they're showing this. This is not the nice. This is not why St. Pancras is under historic protection. Uh, this is the the hotels. I guess the inside of the hotel. Okay, I'm gonna go on Google. I'm gonna go on Google Earth Tourism because I'm frustrated that they're not showing me pictures of what is probably the prettiest train station in London. Uh, it is not actually frozen. It is just thinking. And I don't know if you can hear it, but the computer fan is already making noises because it's struggling. This is St. Pancras. This is King's Cross. This is how St. Pancras looks. I think it's the hotel frontage, and then behind it is the train shed, but this is genuinely very pretty. This is the British Library. Um, I don't remember where, but there's a spot here that's very easy to climb, and you can see this part above the library, and it's just very pretty. Um, I don't remember if I have pics on Twitter. If they would not be pics from Fetty. I don't think I went here when I was in London a couple months ago. Um, but so yeah, they're not going to demolish this thing because historic protection. They could demolish uh, this work of art. Can you see how? Can you see how the modernist style is so um, sublime and artistic? Yeah, this they can knock down to build something for higher capacity. Um, Not the worst decision, honestly. The worst decision is the belief that they need to expand the station. So let's discuss that because that's the source of so much of the high cost. It's the belief that they need to expand the stations or build new stations, and it's not just London, it's also Birmingham. Uh, so let us not go back from St. Pancras to Euston and see what the rail traffic there is. So they tell us, is there a way I can hide the table of contents and center myself? Yes, I can. Okay. The London Overground is not that relevant. It's just its own tracks. Yeah, sometimes my video freezes when I watch other people stream, which is frustrating, but King's Cross is nice, but King's Cross is not St. Pancras, for example. Um, I think I did actually take a photo of platform 9 3/4 in 2011. Uh, J.K. Rowling's crimes include kind of jump-starting present-day British transphobia, um, lending her name to like the worst interpretations ever, with like a game that's like with a video game that's literally about you oppressing the goblins, and also getting her rail tracks in London wrong. It's a meme where there are tracks between platforms 9 and 10. They're not opposite sides of the same platform. But anyway, so um, the so this is just its own tracks. Um, what are these? So let's just look at the regional services. Uh, so this is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 trains per hour. We're going to ignore the intercities because the intercities are going to be all high speed too. Because look, this is all to Birmingham. Actually, maybe trains from Coventry might be on the old line, so that's maybe 10 trains an hour. I think the trains to Shrewsbury are just gonna go via high speed 2 and via Birmingham. So this is where I'm questioning my sanity about not remembering the entire map of British of English countries. There was no, I don't remember Shropshire. Trains to Shropshire are gonna go like yeah, something like. I guess part of the issue is that there are. I think they're gonna do this weird terminal in Birmingham, but certainly if they could run through Birmingham, they would just do this. So the so it's not like 10 trains an hour, maybe 12 if you need Shrewsbury. All of these are just going to get high-speed tube. And then there's Caledonian Sleeper, 2 nightly services, which is irrelevant for day trains. So the demand is 12 train present demand. Yeah, I don't remember any of the Scottish ones except West Lothian because of the West Lothian question. The only one I know in Wales is Wrexham, and I don't know any. But given enough time, I can recite to you all of the English ceremonial counties. Especially if there's an unlabeled map and they just remember, and they can use the unlabeled map as a mnemonic. But anyway, so it's 12 trains an hour plus high speed 2. Now, high speed 2, we can just check how much ridership they expect. I don't think they're over optimistic about ridership. Again, this is a line that should expect more ridership than the Elgevesi Dest. This should, at opening, become the busiest intercity rail link within Europe. And I believe they're planning around 16 trains per hour. So when the whole of phase 2 is open is the important one. So 3 trains an hour, 6, 7, 8, 9, 11. This, I guess, has been cancelled. Wait, it's not. It can't just be 11 trains an hour. That's so strange. I mean, it's the same as here. They did just descope all of phase 2 or something. I'm so confused. Why are they ignoring this? I mean, yeah, they canceled the parts of it, but there's still going to be East Midlands, which is not on this list at all. I'm confused. It was supposed to be, I think, 16 trains an hour, which is about the outer limit. Maybe 18 if you try really hard. It's the outer limit of a 2-track intercity railway where all trains run at the same speed. Why do they all run at the same speed? Because they're going to have trains. They're going to have stations on the high-speed line. The Shinkansen has stations on the high-speed line where they're mixing local and express trains with timed overtakes. They're doing amazingly impressive things, running 14 peak trains an hour on that system. High-speed 2 is not designed for that. Essentially, the issue is that between London and Birmingham, they're so close to each other that honestly, it's fine to just make people trying to go to Coventry or Northampton take the slow trains. And then, so by then trains split, and then you can have maybe stations on the main line. I don't think they're planning to. I think they're all going to be on branches, but even if they did, the most congested part would just be London to a bifurcation. And that's actually a good way of running things. You do want your most congested part to have all trains running the exact same stopping pattern. Ideally, you want the rolling stock to be as identical as possible to simplify planning, which is done in Japan. The trains on the Tokaido Shinkansen, the trains run by JR Central, must be identical to the point of all having exactly 1,323 seats, so that the trains can substitute for each other if need be, and they can just swap, and the seats and the seating reservations will not have to be canceled. So about 18 trains an hour on this, and probably about 12 on the regional trains. The regional trains are not actually at capacity. The most local trains are the ones that go to are the ones that are on the Watford DC line. So it's, I guess, 18 plus 2 or 16 plus 12 plus 4. The 4 would just be its own pair of tracks. The 12, how much do you need? These are all terminating trains. So it is possible for 12 trains an hour, for 12 regional trains per hour to terminate on 2 tracks if you try very hard. In Paris, they terminate 16 trains per hour on the 4 tracks of Osman Salazar. So this is something that is not even just Japan. Although this is the RER, the RERE, rather kind of weird. I'm mixing names. It's erreur. I mean, nobody in France is erreur E, right? It's erreur. Erreur E would be if they had a ninth line, which would be called I in English. I'm a very crayon-y person. I only think they should go up to F. But anyway, these are trains that do serve a bigger variety of destinations, so maybe it's harder to control than the RRE. But conversely, Paris is not the outer limit of this. Barcelona does, on 4 tracks, 24 trains per hour on one of its lines. Technically, the station has 5 platform tracks, but only 4 are in regular use. I don't know if the 5th is used. I think the 5th is only used for special events. It's not that the fifth is used whenever there's something wrong with the other 4, and so it's essentially spare capacity. So, what is it? So this is Catalonia is the station, which, because I don't know Barcelona, I need to go around and look. It's not this one. This is the one that goes to France. Oh no, this one. Where is Catalonia? Is it just colored as a brand? Could it? Yeah, Plaza Catalonia. It's this. Oh, they're not color. Oh, they're coloring it as if it is a metro and not a commuter train. I mean, bear in mind, it's still it's a bunch of it's a bunch of branches. It's not. It's not. It's not even that. It is this station. So the schematic is. So this is schematic. Catalonia, and it's a couple branches. And yeah, 24 trains per hour terminate on 4 tracks here. The Tokaido main line before it ran through, I think, was maybe 24 and 4 as well. No, Catalonia does not. Is a terminal. The RER is also a terminal right now. They are planning on through running, or not quite through running. It's going to be a weird overlap. So 16 trains per hour go from eastern suburbs to La Défense. 6 trains per hour go from northeastern Paris at the Gare de Rosapar to western suburbs. 22 trains per hour through the core section. 16 plus 6. Don't ask me how they're planning to timetable that. But currently, it is not running through. There might be some overrun tracks, I'm not sure, but they're not currently running through. And so the upper limit for regional trains is something we can even see in Europe. The 12 trains should fit in 12 tracks. And none probably, that would be horrific, 4 tracks. That also enables a little bit of an expansion. 6 tracks enables a massive expansion. So this can be segregated rather easily. And I accidentally X the tab where you can see the number of platforms. There are 16 platforms. And for people who don't know British English, a platform in British English means a platform track. So it's not. So if you have a physical platform and there are and then there are 2 tracks that it is between, it counts as 2 platforms in the UK. Not in America, it would be 1 platform, 2 tracks. So there are 16 platforms. You can segregate all the regional traffic on 4 or 6 of them. You can segregate the Watford DC line on 2 of them. And then the rest would be high-speed rail. It would be 8 tracks, 8 platforms, I guess. And that is enough. Even 6 is enough. Now, 8 and certainly 6 would require very fast turnarounds by intercity rail standards, but these are things that exist in Tokyo and are not even that impressive for Tokyo. Oh, okay. So the issue is that in Tokyo, for people who don't know, they turn, as I said, it's 14 trains an hour on the Tokaido Shinkansen with 6 tracks. And going north, it's also 14 at rush hour. The trains north of Tokyo have quite high ridership, less than the Tokaido, but it's also more local ridership, so more commuter ridership. So it's peakier. Um, so almost as much ridership, way fewer passenger kilometers, but Tokyo Station doesn't care about your passenger kilometers, it cares about peak traffic. It's about 14 trains an hour, turning on 4 tracks. Now, the Tokyo Station Shinkansen JR East turnaround is something that if you, I may have even, it's something that I may have even vlogged about, I'm not sure, but it is something that they do in, but they have very fast turnaround, and this is with cleaning. Uh, this is something that is impressive to the point that other people in the rest of the world go to study, and not just in the rail industry. Um, the case study of how they uh, managed to turn themselves around. This is also only something they've done in the last, I think, 20 years. It was an early 2000s turnaround with the installation of a new manager. It's actually taught as a case study at business schools. It's taught. I think it's taught as a case at Harvard Business School. Uh, and the upshot is that this is something that Britain is aware exists. Evidently, they sent a delegation to study it, but they think that they can't do it, or at least they act as if they can't, and therefore they think that they cannot. So they say things like it's about flat crossings, but remember, the intercities are going to all go on high speed 2. The high speed 2 system is not going to have flat crossings. Uh, the it's kind of weird. They're talking about great about level crossings, but this is but really the fast turnarounds are about high speed rail. So I don't know why they're talking about this. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah. When I crayon stations, for the record, I never number platforms. I only number tracks. The platforms are labeled by the tracks they serve. So it's the platform. It's platform 1, 2 is tracks 1 and 2. Platform 3, 4 is tracks 3 and 4. Or I label them by destination. But the point is that they could do this. They could do this on the existing station with space to spare because with Tokyo style operations, they would be able to turn in just 4 tracks. So it's something like 4 plus 4 plus 2. And they have 16. Um, they don't need to be um, very hyper optimized, I think, to turn 12 trains per hour on 4 tracks. Uh, on especially when it's regional trains that don't need to be cleaned every time. In Germany, the turnaround times on the regional trains are 8 minutes. Uh, Now, it's 8 minutes where all the trains enter and leave the station at the same time because they have timed connections on the hour or the half hour. So it's not like the actual capacity in terms of trains per hour per track is low on these regional systems in Germany, but this is because there's a surplus of tracks, and these are not urban lines that are just trying to cram commuters into city centers. These are about trying to get people or trying to get between Magdeburg and Dessau or something like that, where capacity was never a problem until the €9 ticket. The €9 ticket essentially filling these trains with people who should have been on a much larger intercity train. And in London, they're not trying to time a connection where all the trains enter at the same time, because where the hell are you going to have a time connection from London Euston? It's a terminal. And it's not even the kind of terminal that's a pinch point like Leipzig. It's a terminal where what's your onward destination from Euston? It's only other parts of London where all of the connections are running like the tube connection across Rail 2 would be running every 3 minutes. That's not how you time connections. This is where you do an untimed connection. Um, the timed connections would, setting aside the fact that Britain doesn't do them, they would be in places that are central to the line. I mean, you could do. I can see this happening in a place like Birmingham, actually, Coventry or something like that. Not Euston. So they can just turn around fast. And so they don't need new tracks. This is billions of pounds that can be saved. Um, the rumor again. I'm guessing the origin of the rumor is that they're not going to run to Euston, only to Old Oak Common. Uh, is that they're saying, well, maybe they're going to do some kind of de-scoping and value engineering out of Euston. If the grain of truth to what the Sun is saying is that they're actually going to not add tracks, then this is actually a really good thing. They could just run to the existing station, the existing platforms. Uh, Britain is only getting new. Okay. First of all, this is very much a you problem. You meaning um, like British railway organization that's to a large extent already changing. They're slowly renationalizing. Second, even if you had different rolling stock, you can spec them out so that they're going to be substantially the same. Um, like it's a different. The issue is not whether you're getting a Velaro Novo or a Zafiro or an AGV. The issue is, are you getting? I mean, AGVs are somewhat divergent. Even that, the issue is whether you can have a 200 and 250, a 300 and 350 kilometer an hour train sets, not all of which are EMUs, all on the same line. Um, that is the issue. Um, what do you mean they need political buy-in, not just commercial buy-in? Like, I mean, um, they need. I mean, first of all, the main block to railway renationalization in Britain at this point is that Corbyn is incompetent. Um, so, and Corbyn is currently not really in existence anymore. It's all going to be the dictatorship of Keith and his and his gaining 300% of the seats in Parliament. Loopholes. Yeah. I have a feeling. I mean, I guess maybe Jeremy Hunt would try to do that, but I have a feeling that trying to plan around conservative dogma about conservative political dogma about railway planning needing to involve some kind of private operations, uh, not the most reliable. Also, at this point, even was doing a little bit of renationalization. Like, so anyway, the point is that they can turn fast. Um, they absolutely can turn fast. This is all professional managers. They should know how to do this. Um, and this is a couple billion quid that is not necessary. Congratulations. Uh, they just need to use the tracks more efficiently. Uh, they also need to not build these tunnels, but that's, I want to say water under the bridge, but it's not actually water. It's tunnel under the hills where they could, if they made an effort, run without tunneling. And the same thing is of Birmingham. Birmingham, they need to just use the tracks. What to find. At Birmingham, they need to use the tracks more efficiently, and then instead of doing this weird thing at Curzon Street, they can essentially building a new station around here. They can just use the existing thing. They might need to widen the approach, bear in mind, but that's still cheaper than building it. I think it's £1 billion for the station. Right. I mean, and the issue is, it's kind of weird where they're de-scoping things to try to limit the cost increases. Because first of all, I think at this point the costs are in line with what the review said. It's just inflation, and inflation is not a real cost overrun. Because remember, inflation does not mean that your prices went up 10% and your wages stayed flat. Inflation, 10% inflation, means everything on average goes up by 10%, and this includes people's wages. Now, the sort of people who whine the most about inflation tend to be the sort of people whose wages don't rise as fast as inflation. This can be because they're pensioners on fixed incomes, although I'm not actually about Britain, but in the United States, social security benefits are actually indexed. So the United States doesn't have pensioners on fixed incomes anymore. I guess public sector retirees are not indexed, but but Social Security in America is indexed. and any kind of private retirement based on, let's say, the stock, it would be investing in the stock market. The stock market is automatically real, because if prices increase 10%, the nominal revenue of these companies also increases 10%. Their costs also increase 10% because the cost of inputs and also labor increase 10%, and their profits increase 10%. So essentially, the stock market is inflation proof. The issue with inflation is, again, in America, there's specifically the issue of public sector retirees, which, to be honest, are not that empowered at the level that decides monetary policy. But also a lot of people who are earning above their productivity. If there's low inflation, they get zero increases in wages and prices rise 2%. If there's high inflation, they get zero increases in nominal wages, or maybe 2%, which is more insulting, and then prices rise 10%. But remember, wages rise on average with prices. So this means that if there's inflation, it's not a real cost overrun, because the ability of the government to afford this automatically increases, because tax brackets are indexed. Okay, so about wages not rising as fast as inflation in the UK. That's really interesting, because in the United States, wages in the last in the great inflation of 2021, early 2022, not only did wages rise faster than inflation, but specifically, poor people had faster increases in wages than rich people. The way that it worked in the United States, and the inflation that everyone said was hurting the working class, was that there was large and noticeable wage compression starting about 3 years ago, where the real wages were rising for the poor and falling for the rich. And my understanding is it is still true in the United States. I think it's also true in France and in Germany. Just watching, for example, how Aldi and Lidl are raising their pay ahead of minimum wage increases. So it's not. So maybe Britain is different, and the poor and wages for the poor did not rise. There was maybe no wage compression in Britain the way there is in Germany, France, or the United States. But in the United States, the issue is that wage compression is read as negative by the elites, because wage compression means lower inequality and the rich get poorer. And the sort of people with working class ID poll, the United States had higher excess death rate from corona than Britain did. But the US also had a lot of stimulus. But anyway, the issue is that the sort of people with working class ID poll who say X hurts the working class, they're not actually working class in any way. Maybe they're labor aristocracy in America, that would be maybe oil rig workers who just because of a combination of severe sexual harassment, keeping the job market small. You basically can't be a woman on these sites, and also genuinely a hard job, earn way higher than their education level, so they have working class ID poll and are wealthy. So maybe it's these people who think that it hurts the working class, but they're not meaningfully working class. And so that's part of it. Another part of it is maybe small business owners. The United States has this political bullshit where small business owners are considered working class rather than the exact opposite. Germany has the same, the Mittelstand. I mean, people think that small business is like a good thing. So it's often the businesses that cannot compete that are most complain about inflation, and often the sort of people who whine the loudest are the sort of people who take time off from their business to go whine rather than run a better business. So this is a lot of where the inflation hurts the working class meme comes from. Again, maybe in Britain genuinely there has been an increase in inequality, but in the United States, the exact opposite happened, and yet people believed that the Great Inflation hurt the working class because, again, it's rich people with working class ID poll. A little bit like the better off people of Essex. Essex man is not rich, but Essex man votes for Essex representative who's not the same social class as Essex men. Oh yeah, I mean, I did say that the UK had. So I know that in the UK they've had. Tony, aren't you like in the 95th percentile of check incomes or something? I mean, I want to say that I get hurt, but I am in a high percentile, in a very high percentile of German incomes, and also I'm not actually getting hurt because my rent, because I was so severely overpaying for rent 3 years ago that my nominal rents have not changed, um, and that's my dominant expense. Um, yeah, I mean, so I mean, yes, okay, I can't buy cottage cheese for 80 cents anymore. It's €1. That's not an important component of my living expenses. Um, but yeah, okay. Yeah, I get paid so irregularly I can't even. Yeah, okay, sure. Yeah, this is this is not the same as inflation hurts the working class. Yeah, yeah, I did see that in Britain people say that the GDP per capita was falling, but also like the pound is just really weak right now. I think so, right? I mean, GBP, USD, BGP, 124. I mean, it was. I guess it was the worst when Liz Truss had opinions, but this is still historically very low. The PPP rate is about 1.5 ish. Um, and the last time that the pound traded above PPP was on the eve of the Great Recession. No, 2014. Then the US dollar rallied, and yeah, anyway, I mean, I get paid in dollars and earn euros. I like how the euro is weak relative to GDP, but relative to PPP, right? I mean, the PPP rate is not 1.1, it's 1.4. And yeah, it's recovering. Uh, Maybe I should have moved more dollars to euros then, but PPP rate is 1.4, was last reached around. I guess at the time the PPP rate was more 1.3, so the crossing point happened, yeah, when the dollar strengthened mid 14. But anyway, the issue is that they can absolutely. So inflation. The point is that inflation means that the prices are rising, but again, revenues are rising, even if even if which is unusual. Inflation is an inequality increaser here. It generates revenue for the government. The government essentially the government accounts are often done in nominal currency, but in practice they're real. In the United States, it's this kind of weird gizmo where mandatory benefits, so Social Security is the one. It's an actual amount of money. It's real. Taxes in America are real, but all government budgeting on other things is nominal. So whenever there's inflation, they say, "Well, costs are over." No, they didn't. Um, and maybe construction materials are rising disproportionately, but but that's not inflation. That's reductions in construction productivity that you need to do something about. Uh, and so, at any rate, they should not. I don't think they should descope Leeds. It's actually important, both for the cross-regional connections, Birmingham to Leeds, and for uh, generating more traffic and helping relieve the East Coast Main Line. I imagine that High Speed 2, Phase 1, when it opens, it makes the East Coast Main Line the most crowded line, in the same way that in London, until the 1970s, the most crowded line was the Baker Loop. And then they opened a relief line in the Jubilee, and at this point, nothing from the northwest is especially overcrowded because essentially they built a third line in addition to the existing to the Met and the Baker Loop. Um, and this is also where the richest people live. Um, but so and the most crowded things are east and south. And east is poor people. South is not like a member. Rowan City is bankers who are all trying to get into the city in the same window of half an hour to an hour. Yeah, here's the. Oh, hey, Yangbo. Yeah, here's the PV conversion factors. Thank you. Um, they're much more precise than what we're doing in the merge cost, in the high speed rail cost database, which is rounded. Um, Essentially, it's kind of weird because usually you round to avoid making things look too precise, but cost per kilometer automatically looks too precise. So yeah, that's the issue with high speed too. Um, I do not know if costs are actually running over or if it's just inflation, which is again not a cost overrun. It means that the nominal number of pounds in the British Treasury is proportionately increasing. If they're having a okay, so if they're saying that Brexit is an issue, let's just do GDP for a talk. USGBFRDE. I think let's just do these. The Americans are just going to make all of us look bad. And by the way, I know Great Britain is not the UK. The World Bank code is GB. Take it up with them. Right after asking them why the fuck Taiwan is not there. So the United Kingdom, as you can see, did have a big corona decline for such reasons as everyone died, and we're actually discussing a train that will only be used by zombies. The restaurant car must serve high quality brains. Please, not canned brains. However, I mean, yeah, Britain. There's kind of a weird meme that Britain is poorer than Slovenia or something. Britain and France are about the same wage, the same GDP per capita as of 2021. I don't know the growth in 2022, but government earnings are GDP per capita, not wages. The government can tax things that are not wages. For example, even if you think, oh, unearned income is taxed at the lower rate, which it is, the government can still tax. Like if you have windfall profits, usually things that are taxable, because often it also means you have high inequality. And remember, the marginal taxes on the rich are higher than on the poor. So I think overall it kind of balances out for government finances, the distributional issues. And yeah, Britain is, I mean, British incomes are not great, but it's Corona. I mean, Germany too. I mean, reset a couple years of economic growth. The United States didn't, mostly because the United States, first of all, did massive stimulus, and essentially, in most places, the Corona, that people just died of Corona. In the United States, people died of Corona and also didn't care. So, sure. Yeah, London and Southeast. Yeah, the north of England is comparable to the better off parts of Eastern Europe, but what I mean by comparable to the better off parts of Eastern Europe, I mean it's still, but it's but it's not the average. It's so we're comparing maybe average Eastern Europe. Let's call it Slovenia, Czechia, Poland, and poorer parts of Britain where the mix of jobs is different. This is yeah. Well, by the way, something that Marco it's something that Marco told me when we were doing the Italian case. Marco was telling me something about the wages, and they seemed low to me, and I was asking, wait, but I know the average wages in Milan are twice as in Naples, so why are you telling me that the wage is the wage? And Marco explained to me that Milan is, yeah, exactly. Milan is the rich part of Italy, so the professional services are there, maybe in Rome, and not in Naples. So so there's, let's call it, the white collar middle class wage in Italy, which is going to look shockingly low to those of us in Northern Europe, let alone the United States. I want to say that a junior engineer is something like 1.5 thousand euros after taxes, and that's the Italian wage. Maybe a little bit more for cost of living in the north and the south, but it's not that different. And so why is the North about twice as rich as the South? Because the North has more people like that and fewer people who wish that they were engineers earning 1.5K after tax. But bear in mind, this is junior engineers. This is people who are younger than me, a lot younger than me. It's probably mid-20s. I mean, Italy is not that poor. But this is so a lot of it is just the what jobs are where part of the country, and this is certainly true in the United Kingdom, where it's not like in London lawyers earn something and finance workers earn something and tech workers earn something and the people cleaning their house earn something lower. And And then all of the numbers get scaled down in Yorkshire. Um, to some extent, it is true, but it's more like the tech workers are in London, the finance workers are in London, most lawyers are in London, and so proportionately, London has less of a working class. Um, and even region, and this is true, and even regions. It's still true at the level of regions. The United Kingdom is not several smaller countries. That's the thing. It's the same with France. London is incredibly high income, and so is Paris. But essentially, London and like all of the really high income professional services all over England, certainly, almost all of them are in London, and all over France, they're going to be in Paris. Corporate HQs, for example. Um, Lots of rich people at the head office, and the head office is going to be in the capital. Um, so this is why you should not compare London with a country or Yorkshire with a country, because Yorkshire is a country minus all of the minus most of not I don't know whether most minus a large fraction of the upper middle class, which is instead in London. This is why I wouldn't do this comparison. Yeah, exactly. In so um, yes, so exactly. We know that Warszawa is richer. Actually, Warszawa might be richer than everywhere in Britain that is not London or the southeast. Um, we also know that Warszawa is undersized. Why is Warszawa undersized? Because here's a good way of figuring out that Warszawa is undersized. Poland and Spain are about the same size. Poland marginally smaller. Poland is actually less decentralized than Spain. Spain is not federal, but it is probably the most federal country in Europe that is not officially federal. It's a little bit like China, maybe, where there's a lot of local autonomy um, in a formally unitary system. Metro Madrid is about twice the size of Metro Warszawa, and the way it was explained to me that Warszawa and also Kiev are undersized by, let's say, Madrid standards, is that Poland and Ukraine are poor, and Ukraine much poorer than Poland. So essentially, um, London, Paris, Madrid live off of both international and domestic migration. Uh, and the sort of so first so until the first invasion of Ukraine in 2014, there were basically no immigration to Poland. Right now, there's quite a lot of it. There's also no immigration to Ukraine, unless you're counting people training their soldiers or something. And the I mean, I guess at this point, the number one source of foreigners in Ukraine is Russia. So technically, people are moving from a richer country to a poor country, but they don't. And they're even. I think they even intend to stay there permanently, which many of them have, although probably not in the state that they expected. And the point is that a lot of the domestic migrants um, are also not moving to Warszawa because the sort of person who can easily migrate often can just migrate to Berlin or London. Um, you can clean. I mean, if you're cleaning people's houses, you can do it with an app, and you can do it in Berlin at higher wage than in Warsaw. Um, and this is, and again, this is same is true for Ukrainian migration before 2022. I mean, yeah, there were refugees from the Donbass, but before 2022, the Ukrainians were not. I mean, yeah, Ukrainians were studying in Poland or in Germany. There weren't Ukrainians who were literally fleeing war. Again, the Donbass, but the Donbass. This is the Donbass. This is all of Ukraine that's being bombed. Um, so the point is that um, the migrants don't perceive Warszawa as comparable to peripheral England. Remember, there's Polish immigration to peripheral England less than to London, but that still exists. Um, and this is also how high speed touring actually needs to be thought of. It's the same thing with the Shinkansen and with the high speed trains in France with the TGV. Essentially, it cements a core periphery dynamic. Not building it is not going to not create the core. It's not going to alleviate the core periphery dynamic. It just means that the periphery is better connected with the core. It's a good thing that the periphery is better connected with the core. It creates more structure in the same way that I talk about structure of density a lot. Yeah, the EU does amplify this. This is correct, but note that Ukraine is not in the EU, and the issue of Ukrainian labor migration to richer countries in the EU, it predates the war. Like at this point, Ukraine has open borders with the EU in practice. Um, so, but this is beforehand. So it's not, the EU has amplified this. You're right, but it's not just the EU. Um, um, I think you need U.S. to Mexico levels of border militarization um, to forestall this, uh, and so and so the upshot is that high speed to so Britain has this core periphery dynamic. You shouldn't ever compare the periphery to another country's core, um, because at the end of the day, what you're saying is that um, people who work at Tesco in Yorkshire earn less than Pony, who lives in Prague, and that too. And Pony lives in Prague, and maybe it hurts the feelings of British people that a Czech millennial out earns them. Pony is a programmer. Um, so, um, okay, yeah, that too. Sure. Um, uh, for the record, judging by accents, the people who work at Aldi and Lidl some of them are immigrants, but usually they're not. I haven't heard Ukrainian accents. And I do hear you. At this point, I'm seeing enough Ukrainians loiter around the train station that I recognize. Maybe I can't tell a Ukrainian from a Russian accent, but I mean, the person. But I know where. But if suddenly there's an influx of people speaking an obviously Slavic, probably East Slavic language loitering around Ostbahnhof, they're not Russian. Yeah. Okay. But the point is, you should not compare the wage of someone doing customer service or working at Tesco with someone who works as a programmer. I'm specifically not saying who your employer is. A programmer, I'm going to say big tech and be very elliptical about where Pony works because I don't want to dox. You can say, you can say if you want. I'm not going to say, but yeah, this is also yeah. So no, GDP per capita intensifies this. GDP per capita intensifies this with it depends. Yeah, this really depends. In the United States, for example, it's the opposite. New York, labor aristocracy is not purely white because New York is two-thirds people of color, but it is much whiter than the rest of the city. And usually the people of color are black. Some of them are West Indian, but I mean, they're heavily black, very few Hispanics and Asians. The labor aristocracy working in, for example, the oil fields in the United States, it's, as I understand it, just white men. Uh, the immigrant working class jobs are working at a meatpacking plant where which is about the only time where an employer of illegal immigrants elects that the immigrants are illegal, because high end employers of usually legal immigrants, let's say Facebook, prefer a more pro immigration policy because their formal sector, they want more formal sector high skilled workers from, let's say, India, and then and then the people who employ informally or who employ illegal immigrants with with their informal status as used as a threat, they like the illegality. Um, huh. Okay. I mean, I see this as restaurants, but that's also because I basically never go to a restaurant not run by immigrants. Uh, but anyway, the issue is that you should not compare the wage of someone doing customer service with the wage of a programmer. You can compare the wage. You can compare what Pony makes with what programmers make in Berlin, and programmers in Berlin make a lot more than Pony makes, and programmers in London make more, I think, than programmers in Berlin make, and programmers in Boston, New York, San Francisco make make a fuck ton more than programmers here do. That's the proper comparison. Um, And yeah, there are people doing there are people working at Lidl in the UK, and there are people working at Lidl in Czechia, and the ones working at Lidl in the UK earn more than the one working at Lidl in Czechia. Um, the issue is maybe not about connecting the people who work at Lidl with the capital, because there's also a Lidl at the capital. Um, I mean, I guess in Britain it would not be Lidl because there aren't that many Lidls. So it would be there's plenty of Tesco's at the capital. Side note: the people I mentioned to you who bought in Walthamstow because they're rich enough to afford it and they get a good commute out of it. Um, when I visited them, we only ever got food at Tesco, not Waitrose or anything like that. I guess one of them is American and therefore maybe didn't get that proper middle class Oxford grads are not supposed to shop at Tesco, and the other is, I guess, is sufficiently. I shouldn't say rebellious because of where this person works. It's sufficiently not feels resentful of the British class system that they would absolutely buy at Tesco. Um, Not Marks and Spencer. Tesco. So the issue is that there's Tesco, then there's Sainsbury's, which is for less poor people, and then there's Marks and Spencer and Waitrose. Waitrose is the one that's most stereotypically for rich people, and yeah, it's overblown. Um, I perceive this as less classed than the United States, where first of all there's no Walmart in pretty much any middle class urban neighborhood. Um, and there's Target maybe, but usually it's much more class stratified, especially in New York. Yeah, there's a distribution in the store. What might be comparable to Kaufland in Britain? Nothing. Uh, so Germany, so Germany has an unusually classless grocery system. There's four chains, four and a half, five if you count Norma, which you shouldn't. There is Aldi. There's Lidl, which also includes Kaufland. The difference is size. So you should think of Kaufland as a Walmart that is okay for everyone to shop at. Mjölnbo. Or maybe as like Monoprix, except bigger and cheaper. Uh, and there is Edeka, which has its own discount brand, which is called Netto. There is there's Rewe, which has its discount brand, which is called Pennies. The prices are not that different between the discount and the non-discount chains. Rewe will have generally a better mix of goods than Pennies, and some of them will cost more, but the difference is not a very big one. And I mean, sure, I think they might share brands or something, but I guess it's Kaufland is big enough they don't do the store brands. And everyone shops at these. Yeah, there are some rich bobos who prefer to shop at Biomarkt, but let me show you. Let me show you how important Biomarkt is to the country. Edeka, another Edeka, Lidl, Rewe, Aldi, Penny, which is Rewe, Aldi, Norma, which is the where I say 5.5, 4.5 sometimes, Kaufland, which is owned by the same people as by the same person as Lidl, uh, Spar, which is owned by Edeka. This is the this is okay. Then there's the Netto. I guess Spar Express is the not Netto, is the cheap Edeka. No, Netto Mark and Discount. Netto is different. Sorry, what was I looking at? Bio Company has 57 stores. So, and yeah, Alnatura, like that kind of bullshit, but very little of that is like relevant to how even snobbish middle class urban vegans shop. The snobbish middle class urban vegans shop at Aldi, Lidl, Edeka, whatever. I saw some Normas. I've bought a little bit at Normas. They just seemed like a crummier version of the usual. I don't know the Low Countries at all. In France, Casino and Carrefour are not classed, but Casino and Carrefour are for everyone. They sell at cheaper prices than most American grocery stores, slightly more expensive than Walmart or Aldi prices. And Aldi and Lidl, I'm not sure about Aldi actually, but Lidl is entering the bottom of the market to compete with them. But again, in France, it's still mostly not classed. And yes, Norma is terrible. Um, like just the stores are crummy. It's not like they have cockroaches. Just stores are kind of crummy. But anyway, so the point is that with high-speed trains, um, it's not about the supermarkets because the supermarkets are everywhere. Um, my very bourgeois neighborhood has Lidl and Aldi and everything. I mean, in Paris, I lived in Nation, which is very bourgeois by French standards, not by Parisian ones. Um, what were the grocery stores? Franprix, Monoprix, Casino. There was, I think there was one discounter that I wouldn't go into very much, which is much smaller than the others. Um, and yeah, it's really about connecting periphery and core, but again, it's not the store. It's not the retail worker periphery. It's the customer service periphery. It's the periphery where people are working in one place, and that place is not in the main city because that's too expensive. It's also related to Yimby, where if you also Yimby the main city, then the customer service is probably not going to be in a Yimby London either, but the things in between customer service and head office um, would just probably just be part of the head office. Um, why is Tesco correlated with fascism? Because like I don't perceive Britain as especially fascist. But that is because, just as a reminder, I lived in France up until about 4 years ago. And yeah, seeing all the radical left graffiti in at Nation change to populist bullshit graffiti that was also against Anne Hidalgo on the guess the grounds that she does not respect the civil rights of automobile French people, only the civil rights of white, Arab, Black, and Asian French people. That was the complaint. But anyway, um, it's not really about the supermarkets. It's about other issues of stratification where it's just harder absent high speed rail. This is essentially why high speed rail is good. It's not. I mean, it's not going to change inequality. You want to change inequality, raise taxes on wealthy people, or maybe raise income taxes and spend more and do more social spending. That's how you reduce inequality. All else is bullshit. You want to increase equal opportunities. You partly do that, and you partly have an education system that is not class based. Um, it's terrifying, by the way, that the German gymnasium system produces more social mobility than the British system or the French system. So do something about that. But it is good for like national development. And if there's cross-border rail in Europe, also for pan-European development. And by cross-border rail, I mean maybe Belgium should stop having the world's slowest high-speed trains. Like this should be fast all the way. This should be fast all the way. This should be fast all the way, which is something that I wish Germany understood. Um, and then, and again, part of it is connecting core to other core. Eurostar would be much better if it didn't have security theater. Paris to Brussels, very good. Fortunately, they charge too much. Trains in Germany got a lot of ridership, and we have a core periphery dynamic here, but it's not one city and the rest is periphery. We're not France, we're not Britain. It's just connecting core to core. Berlin to Berlin to Hamburg, Berlin to Frankfurt. I mean, it's not fast, but people don't. I mean, it's close enough. People don't fly. Berlin to München, München to Frankfurt. I mean, it can be connections between cities. It can be core to core connection or core to periphery. Periphery to periphery is usually weaker, but how it succeeds in social mobility. Uh, in Britain, your lot in life is substantially determined by where you went to uni. Uh, what do you mean the habitual faculty thing for the poor? No, I mean everywhere in Europe, you either graduate with a high school leaving diploma, giving you access to university, or you don't, and then you claim the house of the person who did. The issue is that in Britain, Britain and France are both countries of where you went to uni. France slightly less than Britain, but France is probably the most where you went to uni country in continental Europe. Uh, Germany is among the large countries. I shouldn't say large India, but among the countries in its size class is probably the least where you went to uni. Uh, is the least where you went to uni system. It's more the what you studied at uni and how you did in uni. So your and yeah, so in Germany this was traditionally the situation as well, but at this point, even the vocational schools at this point, the vocational schools are not. I mean, it's usually not a purely vocational Hauptschule. It's something called a Gesamtschule, which is supposed to be comprehensive. It's not actually comprehensive. It's just to take the vocational schools, and they say that if you're smart enough, and if your teachers don't hate you because you're not rich enough to test into a gymnasium, to get recommended into a gymnasium, then you can get ahead and do an Abitur. Um, and yeah, so in Germany, the secondary school system is pretty class segregated, but the uni system isn't. So your lot in life is not determined by what you did at 17, 18 as in the UK, or at 20 in France. The US is also a 17, 18 country. Um, no, that's not actually true. In Germany, people absolutely do see immigrants in school. Uh, and this is not even a just a recent thing. Anton, uh, this guy, grew up in Berlin just after reunification, and had Turkish immigrant, and had maybe, I don't know if first gen, but if they were not first gen, then they were second gen Turks in class. But yeah, this is a big problem. I don't know the exact social mobility levels in Germany. They're not great, but again, better than Britain and France. Where in Britain and France, first of all, there's the how you did at 18. There's in France also, they've devolved education to the regions, which is a disaster because Ile-de-France has so many better is so much better resourced than the provinces that it does matter. Um, I suspect this might also. I suspect the core periphery dynamic might matter in Britain, but I'm not sure. But in France, it's how the devolution there worked. Bear in mind, there's devolution and core periphery dynamic in Sweden. It's just that I guess they're better at interregional transfers for it. And Sweden is also a what you studied at uni, not a where you went to uni country. Um, so, um, and also, I mean, all of the Nordic countries have very low inequality, and low inequality just means that the poor people have more opportunities to catch up. Um, where if your father beat your mother and as a result there's a divorce, you're not consigned to a life of poverty. Um, so that is a real difference. Um, and again, infrastructure. Oh yeah, yeah, of course. Yeah, so Germany didn't do that. Actually, the class segregation here is exclusively class. There's no racial segregation. I mean, except that it's downstream of lower education levels for Middle Eastern immigrants. But there's no, but so controlling for class, there's no racial segregation in German school. It's not like in the United States where there absolutely is. Like you try to do everything poorly for social mobility. There is a country that does that in the developed democratic world. It's called the United States. It's a where you went, not a what you studied country. Even worse than Britain, I think. Um, like just in Britain, I think it's just 1 hour elite of PPE and history grads at Oxford or something, and but below the Oxbridge level, it does actually matter more what you studied. And in the United States, it's just tiers upon tiers upon tiers of who gets to yell at who, and then but also the feeder system into that is very segregated by race, by class, by parental income levels, aka class, parental education levels, aka class. Um, so yeah, this is so again. I stress about this because I stress that high speed two again good project, possibly even okay at this price, but marginal at this price. Descope things that you don't need, like Euston, like the new Birmingham station as well. Um, Restore leads. Like you want to build train lines, you don't want to build new train stations, relieving train stations that are not objectively at capacity. Um, it's not going to fix Britain's social problems. You want to fix Britain's social problems, make the school system less elitist, and make the um, and again just increase redistribution. You want to do good transportation. That's an efficiency program. That's not an equity program. People who try to turn transportation into an equity program fail on both equity and transportation, aka a lot of no transit America, where the only people who care are people who um, care about bus service because poor people use it, and then try to make it into a welfare service. And then, as soon as a poor person becomes even mildly not poor, they get a car. Yeah, exactly. And in the United States, also, and this is actually relevant to governance beyond the school. So I do want to mention it and not say it's out of scope. In the United States, the idea of being governed by the state is viewed as an imposition. Controls through demographics. Um, I mean, every country has class stratification. Like, I don't think it matters very much. Like, I mean, I mean, here the underclass was traditionally like girls from very religious backgrounds where the parents just did not invest in girls' education. Um, but and then maybe these people stopped going to church and started investing in girls' education. Often because it's a sequence where I mean, very traditional areas where, first of all, when people realize they need education, they invest in boys' education more, and that opens a very large educational gap between boys and girls, and then between men and women. India, for example, is in that stage, and then the gap starts to narrow, even in societies that remain very sexist, like South Korea, because educated men prefer educated wives and therefore and therefore the next generation of the family also invests in the girls' education, even if they don't think women should work outside the home. So the United States in the 1950s didn't even have that big of an education gap by gender. Again, because like I mean, the women who like became the core of second wave feminism were all the where the generation of women who went to elite colleges specifically in order to find an equally elite husband. Um, it's just that with the norms of the baby boom era, the issue at the time was that there was an unusually low birth age at the time. The traditional Western age at first childbirth and marriage is probably a little before that would be late 20s for men, mid 20s for women. And then there was a dip in the uh, in the baby boom era when suddenly it was low 20s. And essentially that sort of kind of skewed the dynamics. A lot of women in college dropped out after finding a husband, which again was unusual in tradition. I mean, in traditional Western culture, going back about 400 or 500 years, you do not get married at what is present day university age. I mean, there's been an overture at this point that the marriage age is higher than traditional, but I mean, the marriage ages of the 70s, 80s, 90s were the traditional ones. The 50s were the weird ones. That's the gender dynamic. And so, yeah, I mean, there's always an underclass. I mean, it's not, I mean, the underclass can be determined by, again, by gender, religiosity, rurality is a big one. Could be skin color. Could be like, or it could be local. Could be like local racial differences. But it's not. I mean, again, like Northern Ireland is a little bit like trying to compare. I think a lot of it is like again trying to compare customer service people who live in Yorkshire with programmers who live in Prague. Like that does not mean that Britain is uh, not wealthy by any Eastern European standard. Um, I did GBFRDE. Let's do Czechia, which is, and I believe has been since like, forever, like centuries, the richest country in Eastern Europe. Yeah, so yeah, Czechia you can see is gaining, but Czechia is still noticeably poorer than Britain and France. Um, and this is despite pretty massive growth in the 2010s and before the 2010s. Um, how did you get here? I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's about state control. Yeah, exactly. So the issue with state control is that in the United States, the mentality is that the state is a grabbing hand. You see a little bit of it in Blairism as well. The state provides the stick, the market provides the carrots. So being controlled by the state is viewed as a negative thing. Um, it's and you see this in London. London has a lot of autonomy that Paris does not have. RATP is a state-owned firm. The Paris police prefecture is part of the national police. It's sometimes it's some peripheral cities. I shouldn't say peripheral; they're in the Riviera. They're not actually peripheral. That have municipal police departments, but it's considered okay to have the national police you because the state is a helping hand. The state, yeah, takes taxes from you and complains to you when there's a typo in your tax form and complains that you didn't report some kind of income on the right line in your tax form, uh, and complains about bullshit regulations that you're not fulfilling and gives you fines over bullshit, but it's also the state that guarantees you healthcare, pensions, and so on. Um, so even in Italy, where this is way more abusive than let's say France, um, tax evasion, and this is something where I blogged about I think, a little over a year ago, where in Italy, when government spending increases, uh, this is the paper. It's look for the paper. It's called Institutional Issues Transparency. The link, and it's from here. Uh, in Italy, when government spending increases, people evade taxes less, and this is not about greater tax enforcement. It's that people in Italy perceive government spending as good for them. There are a lot of places where it's the other way around. I don't know if the United States has been studied. Traditionally didn't have a lot of tax evasion, but they just legalize tax evasion the rich do. But in like a lot of weak state developing countries, higher government spending is perceived as an imposition. Um, it's not a 19th century idea; it's a slave owner idea. It's specifically a Jeffersonian idea, and this is because Jefferson was a slave owner who viewed um, the whose conception of freedom was I am not a slave and nobody can put me in any subordinate position because subordination makes me a slave. And then you look at non-slave owners in the United States among the founders, for example, Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine didn't think this. Thomas Paine, I mean, yeah, Tom Paine thought that it was a good thing that French government spending after the revolution was curtailed, whereas British government spending, and it was bad that British government spending was out of control. On hindsight, we know that this was wrong, and Britain was perceived as a more reliable uh, debtor by the international credit market, and so it could afford to do this more. But in the same book, Paine also proposes a uh, a progressive property tax uh, that maxes out at 100%. It's in 5% steps, and the highest is, I believe, 100%. The like the kind of excessive localism is essentially slave owners worried about abolition. Um, and this was never the case for any kind of continental European idea of civil liberties or British. In Britain, they went through the motions, but England was so horrifically centralized and stayed this way. Um, so it was never about building local institutions, quite to the contrary. So there's this American idea that being governed by the state is like being a prisoner of some kind. And again, a lot of it is slave owner ideas of freedom, and um, and this is also get to the fact that the government never does it; only nudges. It only nudges local actors. And so the idea that the state can run the schools because it's normal. In Canada, they do it and it's fine. In France, I mean, it's not the state; it would be some of it is devolved down to regional level, but or to department level, but it's not hyper local. Germany, it's state. And in the United States, it's hyper local. Um, and this idea that being governed by the state is an imposition, um, and being governed locally is what you want, which is really strange. Usually, I mean, think about it. Usually, working for a big business is considered a middle class thing. I mean, it's considered maybe good to work in big tech. If you hate the tech industry, then no, but it's more prestigious to work for big tech than to work for a smaller firm, unless the smaller firm is a startup that has fantasies about becoming the next Google and the next Facebook, and then tries to pay salaries comparable to Google and Facebook. Right, the EU only nudges, which is why the cross-border transfers suck, but the EU is not a state. The EU is very slowly becoming a nation. It is not a state. Um, and yeah, I know. And yeah, this is very confusing, but I mean, the idea of the state as bad is like a lot of American libertarians will say the state is a negative thing, is because the state they associate with European countries being horrifically tyrannical with telling you to send your children to school rather than to work in the fields and the factories. Um, Bear in mind, the United States had universal secondary education before most of Europe did, but the United States also had a lot of these anti-state, like pro states' rights or pro local people, or a lot of them were Southerners who thought that it was horrifically tyrannical that any kind of government can ever tell parents not to use their children as child labor. How can the state impugn on like the family unit or something? So this is again an American thing, largely absent here. Sometimes you see populists imported from the United States, um, but the issue is that this does stem state-led development, and again, it's an American thing. In Europe, um, I mean, in Europe, if people want the state to be racist, and often they do, the state is just racist. In the United States, if they do, then the local government will be racist instead. Is a big issue of that. And in Britain, they can do coordinated planning for high speed too. In the United States, no, they don't. In the United States, the idea that a federal body will just sit down and write the timetables and plan the infrastructure is anathema. They do it as a nudge with competitive grants. Um, do we have competitive grants here? Yeah, Sweden, for example, has competitive grants, but big ticket items, especially in the capital, now a competitive grant. The state, I mean, it's understood that there's going to be less autonomy in the capital, and people are fine with it. You know the name. I mean, people know the name of the mayor, but people know generally much more about the prime minister than about the mayor. Um, the and this is even true in the United States. People know the president and members of parliament way better than they do local government. And this is not even some stupid, oh, why aren't people interested in local affairs? No. We talked about inflation before. Um, yeah, the EU can do the EU can draw. No, the EU has done a lot of nudging on stuff like Shortcut 21, but the EU has not actually done any kind of planning. It could. So the EU does have the power to do so. It would require an EU Parliament majority that is run by S and D with. I mean, they don't need an all-left majority. That's never going to happen. But they don't need an all-left majority. They just need enough of a left that they can uh, write the rules with like the more progressive members of EPP and ALDE, I guess RE, to have like a rail network that's not just based on privatization and splitting infrastructure apart from operations. Yeah, I mean, Rail Baltica is making something happen. The Americans, yeah, no, but yeah, and the issue is that, yeah, in the EU, it's essentially all of the problems in the EU are not. Some of them are the structure of the EU, like the meme that is the Council of Ministers, but a lot of it is just people are voting for EPP, um, and or for worse parties in EPP, which do exist. And a lot of it is governed by nudge. Um, the nudger is always so because the nudger never has experience doing. The nudger never the nudger only governs you as a scourge. The nudger is never actually going to be able to. Uh, the nudger is never going to be able to actually manage because they don't have experience running things. They have experience telling other people what to do. So when they come in, they perceive the role as punitive. Again, you see this with schools where state takeovers of schools are not okay. The district has failed, and now the state provides services to the citizens of the state, and therefore it will provide good education services to the people of this city that was taken over. And to be very clear, this is not just Republican states screwing over Black Democratic cities. This threat exists even absent that kind of politicization. And this is, and again, with trains, it's kind of the same. You need this kind of coordinated planning, which again exists in Britain. Britain does this. High Speed 2 is a state program. Maybe they think they're going to contract parts of it out, but the impact on planning is not actually that significant. On the contrary, I mean, they can even use the contracting out as an excuse to implement Japanese-style turnaround operations in the same way that a lot of efficiency improvements in Japan from the 1980s onward were sold as part of the breakup and privatization of JNR, even though, to be very clear, the biggest changes happened before the breakup. And yeah, part of it circles down to politics and governance, which we do say in the synthesis of our construction cost report, the one that has the final release date, in case you haven't seen on Mastodon or Twitter. We have a final release date. It is the 6th of February. And so or I guess on my blog. And yeah, a lot of it circles down to like doing versus nudging. Remember, Britain does rather than nudging. And yeah, the fact that there's conflict with the Treasury is not a bad thing. The Treasury, I mean, if you don't have conflict with the Treasury, you're spending too much money. The Azerbaijani desk had a lot of conflict with the Treasury and politicians, which is why it was privately financed. It was, I mean, the government did. The French state, the compromise with the French state didn't finance it, but it guaranteed the bonds. But the point is that Britain is kind of this weird thing where it's not the American amateur hour, and this is why I spend much less time talking about British issues than about American ones. British issues are sometimes horrific with the extreme costs of Crossrail, the extreme costs of High Speed 2. And yet, it's so clearly not American amateur hour. I mean, I like in the United States, they really don't know anything. In Britain, what are we talking about? We're talking about how they are using Euston at efficiency levels that are average to maybe slightly above average by German standards, below the best that can be done in France and Spain, which are kind of edge cases because it's commuter terminals in Paris and Barcelona, so two large, Paris much larger than Barcelona, very famously dense and very transit-oriented metropolitan areas. And yeah, Euston doesn't do as well and does much worse than Japan. But the difference between that and anything in America is fast. Okay, it's like I keep slagging on EPP. Britain is like British Rail is like it's not British Rail, the company that no longer is. British Rail Planning, British Rail Infrastructure. Honestly, British Rail privatization is a really good analogy for it. It's essentially the problems of EPP. So, kind of traditional elites that are too change averse, are bad at adopting best practices, unless the best practices are privatization, which they are not. And yeah, exactly. So to the extent that British planning is bad for EPP type reasons, the United States infrastructure is AfD. Um, like malicious people all over, people who view their jobs as wreckers, and yeah, occasionally you have someone who's good. Like, I mean, you have civil servants who can be good at their jobs, and you don't hate the Minister of Transport, like a Secretary of Transportation, Buttigieg, but the agency heads, I mean, the people they've brought in, it's all extreme levels of pettiness and malice, and and so again, they're in a worse position than the UK as a result. The UK has problems now. Again, if the reports that the cut of Euston, that the trains are only going to run to Old O'Common, which again have been denied. If the reports are actually people saying, oh, maybe there's not going to be new track at Euston, they're just going to use the traditional tracks, which judging by this picture, they're not. Then that is a very good thing. Then Britain is engaging in value engineering. The only sad thing is that they should have never had to get to this point, that they should have done this from the start. Um, it's certainly not a matter of what the New Statesman said, uh, it's called cost cutting, or like or bean counting, symptom of our terminal decline. Uh, so first of all, the fact that there's a tabloid that says things that's not a symptom of terminal decline, it's a symptom of bad media. Uh, but certainly, it's not about saving money. Again, high speed two, yeah, the New Statesman is right about that. But Euston, especially if what happens is they figure out how to descope the extra tracks. That is a good thing. That is a good thing. This is greater efficiency. Britain can do that. It's billions of pounds on at Euston, a billion at Birmingham. I don't remember what about the other stations, for example, Manchester. Um, you'll be Sefi, or you'll be surprised how much size covers a lot of problems. I mean, remember the Americans are wealthier than we are. Um, like size and scale do cover a lot of problems. Um, and yeah, I mean, so again, I don't want to make this 2 minutes late on American rail planning. It's terrible, but this is really about the problems of high speed too. Um, and yeah, I mean, can high speed do better? Yeah, will it? I don't know. I mean, it's again, if it turns out that the sun is just misinterpreting things that are just about um, value engineering this, and this is very good. Again, this looks already cleared, so they can't do full value engineering. We will just use the same tracks. Euston has fast and slow approach tracks in addition to Watford DC. So yeah, it means that you're going to need to eat all the regionals to the slow approach tracks. That's fine. I mean um, the really fast trains are just going to be on the intercity, are going to be on high speed too anyway. Um, so again, it's unfortunately they're not value engineering from zero, because the Chilterns tunnels are too advanced. Some of this tunneling is too advanced, but it's possible they're actually doing a good job. Again, I can't tell because the Sun said something false, and also a dog bit a person, and the Pope turns out to be a member of the Roman Catholic faith. Uh, but yeah, yeah, turning it Old Common would be terrible. But I mean, again, it's a Sun report. It's been denied. Um, would you trust a British government minister? No. Would you trust a British government minister if they say one thing and the Sun says the other? Yes. Um, so anyway, that's the issue. I'll take questions for a couple of minutes, but I need to. But 10 is almost a hard stop. Uh, so this is essentially the main problem with Britain at this point. It's just lack of value engineering. Why? Because they've built high speed too late. Bear in mind, the US has the same problem with the Northeast Corridor, but they have 12 other problems, whereas in Britain, it's mostly just they built it too late. They could have done it under British Rail in the 70s if they were uncertain because of the decline in rail in that era. Certainly after the success of the Tejava, they should have immediately started in the 80s. I don't know if it was just Maggie doing austerity or if British Rail was pretty screwed up in that era, or if British Rail was already too invested in the tilting train concept. But this is something that should have been done at the latest in the 80s, and it would have been done at French cost. Britain did not have a cost premium over France until the 90s. Um, it could have been amazing in the 80s. Um, I'm sure, yeah, sure, there were thoughts, but I mean, there were thoughts about doing Crossrail in the 1940s. Um, the actual Crossrail project, I think, 2000s is when they started in earnest. I mean, no, they were removing. No, the beaching axe was mostly the beaching axe was one main line that was duplicative with the Midland. That's the line that was running to Marylebone, and a lot of local lines. Um, like honestly, the stuff they removed was genuinely, with only a handful of exceptions, not that important to the network. It's just when you have a golden palace and you sell the gold to a collector, the golden palace was not useful for you, but it's still a symptom of you not being able to afford a golden palace. Um, the main of the East Coast Main Line is Fort Cox. Like I'm sure, like far enough north, it's not, but the parts of it that need to be Fort Cox are Fort Cox. Anyway, are there other questions? Yeah, there are bottlenecks, but yeah, there's that right. Isn't that the bottleneck where, like, I mean, I have the London lines map, right? Hey, yeah, I didn't lose that much. There was a time in which I spoke for like 10 minutes or 15 minutes because I was just on one of these maps and didn't tap back to check the audio. Yeah, sorry. Um, yeah, exactly. I mean, there is the Wellwyn bottleneck, but the gap between this and the removed sections is big. Um, but anyway, yeah. So it's something Britain should have done. It's something Britain should do. But please value engineer this. There is space at Euston. There is space in Birmingham. Um, it's billions of quid on the line, and um, it's just kind of an annoying thing where there's a review that states a cost range, and people will just take it as an endorsement of the uppermost end. It's one of these. If you have too much money in contingency, it will just be wasted problem. And yeah, so as I said, if people have questions, I will take them. If not, then we'll come back on, I guess, Tuesday. Um, I expected this to be short, but I guess about an hour out of the 3 hours are a digression about schools and about governance by the state versus by local notables, aka the gentry. Uh, do I? Oh, it's a really good question. It's a really good question. I want to say yes. Um, but um, the problem is that these more marginal projects. So what do you mean by more marginal? So in the case of Britain, this would be doing London to Scotland probably in one go. The problem is that first of all, um, there is a tendency, especially if you're behind, to start small. Especially now, there's this growing tendency to do small lines rather than big lines, whereas the Tokaido Shinkansen was built in one go. The LGV Sud-Est opened in two steps, but the second stage was, but they began construction around the same time. At the time the first stage opened, the second stage was almost done. It was just 2 years between them. So 400 kilometers. Tokaido was 515. Here, there's usually the issue is not you phase and therefore costs are high. Usually, it's the costs are high because over time you've just accreted a lot of stuff that you think is necessary and isn't, because probably they've had old plans that assumed something about how fast trains could turn at Euston, and these were correct assumptions, maybe based on the operations of the 70s, 80s, 90s, and maybe at the time they weren't thinking in terms of 12 trains an hour. They were thinking in terms of much less, because that was how much the LGV Sud-Est ran at the time. It took it until the 2000s to get to its present-day saturation level. And so usually, so when you're on top of things, yeah, you build things for the capacity of, I don't know, 4 trains an hour or something. And then as there's more train service and there's more demand, you run more trains, you figure out how exactly you're going to create more capacity for them on existing footprint. And this is how you learn gradually how to turn, in the limiting case of Tokyo, 14 high-speed trains an hour on 4 tracks with 7-minute cleaning, 12-minute turnaround process. When you're coming into this very late, you're still thinking in terms of like all the accumulated craft of, oh, we have to have, or we can only turn a train every half hour per platform or per platform track or something like that, which is the typical case in Germany or Switzerland, which never had to innovate in this because have you seen how massive our stations are? And so, but they see that there's plenty of ridership at this point, so they plan around very high ridership and very high capacity, and then they miss the value engineering. So it's not something. So this is not something where including marginal lines would have helped. The marginal, I mean, think about it. The marginal lines, let's say the Leeds bit, has been descoped. Yeah, no, for New York, yeah, I remember New York had cost over and had extreme costs by the era standards in the 1930s already. Um, the and then they kept rising. The real costs kept rising. It's not just inflation. And so remember, the issue in New York is not segmenting, therefore high costs. It's high costs, therefore segmenting. And it's and you actually see this in real time in Vancouver. In Vancouver, the plan was to do VCC Clark to UBC as one project, and then only when it became clear that the costs were going to double did they cut it to only Arbutus. So they, instead of doing the full line for about 3 point something bill Canadian, they're doing half the line for about that cost. Yeah, exactly. And Britain does. I mean, the turnaround times, for example, at the main terminals in London for commuter trains, I mean, they're not the best or anything, but they're pretty good. They're better than most of Germany, just because London is huge, and German cities are not. So when you're on top of things, yeah, you just learn to use the infrastructure better, and you learn that all the things that you think are necessary are just at best or at best gold plating, and at worst actively harmful. And don't get me wrong, you use gold in tooth fillings. You can use, gold is not useless. It's just yeah, exactly. Part of it is just people is when you don't build people like you're gonna have all these local gentry making ridiculous demands. And this is where you're getting the children's dollars also. Um, and the problem is that giving them the demands will just make the demands um, permanent. This is what happened in Taiwan. Taiwan built, I don't know if Taiwan built too late, but Taiwan built at an era of flux, and therefore the construction standards there generalized, and as a result, even now, construction costs in Taiwan are permanently very high. And this does make its transit systems weaker than those of anywhere else that urban and rich Asia. I mean, Taipei still has good trains. It's just people are moving to Taoyuan in New Taipei. Yeah, no, this. Yeah, I mean, yeah, we had a shadow. Um, but I will say that, for example, the fact that we have timed connections, like the regional bonds here are way better than their equivalents in Britain. Um, the intercity, I mean, honestly, the intercities. So the intercity operations are not as good, but the intercity operations here are on a system that I showed you has about 1,000 kilometers of high-speed track. In Britain, no. Uh, so again, remember the UK. Again, the UK has a lot of problems, but it's not American amateur hour. A lot of the people there are actually aware of problems. Um, it's just still supremely expensive. Uh, yeah, if the UK has high speed to it, I mean, bear in mind the model split in Germany is 16%, and in England and Wales before Corona it was 15%. Like it's not. I mean, and yes, a lot of it is London sucking out the oxygen. Same thing with like France having 16%. It's just Paris. No, just the majority of. I believe the majority of French rail ownership is in metropolitan Paris. Um, yeah, and no, if you don't, I mean, I wouldn't call it equivalent to Germany just because, I mean, Longclear has a higher model split, but it's also a bigger city, with fast tube system. And yeah, exactly. It's just that, um, it's part of this issue of core periphery dynamic, where one of the reasons that devolution tends to be more to usually to non-capital regions is that the capital is okay already. Um, and yeah, there's TFL, but and Thatcher, out of malevolence, reduced the ability of the metropolitan counties to be able to plan things. I think David Cameron had some ideas to reverse that and do devolution to the Met counties. I don't know if anything of that actually happened or if it's one of these ideas that didn't survive the prime minister. Um, so yeah, he wanted to do devolution at that level, like Met County. Um, it's just and London is probably where it's least important. Um, oh, Cameron was mostly, I mean, mostly talk, and you guys are no longer in the union. Um, General rule for politicians: never, under any circumstances, be the person who um, initiated a referendum that you don't want to win. Like you want, like if there's an insurgency that demands a referendum, let them be the insurgency. Yeah, you are, but Britain, yeah. Um, yeah, but so that's again. So the issue with so there is a devolution issue where I think Germany does better at governance level, but um, the important, and this is something that Britain should be doing with the Met counties. It's just that's very local, and intercity. Yeah, Britain could have better intercity rail than Germany. Like Britain has, it's kind of weird. Like Britain has a very good city distribution for this. Essentially, Britain has high density. The cities are close enough to each other. It's very easy to connect all of them. Um, Essentially, it's just gonna. I mean, especially if they actually build to Scotland and not just to and not just to Crewe or something, then they're gonna or even Preston, they're going to be able to kill domestic flying in Great Britain, and then everything's just going to be, I guess, inter island to Northern Ireland. Honestly, even this could be high speed rail, but this is a legitimately difficult project, whereas this is not. It's just being made difficult. Uh, Wait, yeah, sure. The operations can be good. It's just that at the end of the day, um, the infrastructure is where the infrastructure is, and I mean, you do need to be able to build infrastructure. And yeah, Deutsche Bahn Fernverkehr, not the best. Not the worst either, by the way. There are things we do better than France, but I mean, at the end of the day, you do need to have some lines like this, or and this, or ideally lines like the much more continuous thing here and here and here. Not past Brussels, but past Bruxelles Midi. It's bullshit. And here. Yeah, that's the main issue. And yeah, do people have more questions, or is it because it's already well past the natural line? Guess it's 3 hour. No, it's not 3 hour recording. It's 3 hour session. So if not, then thank you. And okay, so as I said, the construction cost report will be out on the 6th of February. I know I've given earlier dates before, and I made sure not to give them on video, or like on a recorded video. This is recorded. And as I said, lots of delays, but there's a final date. It's a Monday, so Tuesday the 7th will just be about that. I don't know if I'm gonna stream this Tuesday, this Saturday, or both. At least one of them I will do. And not sure about the topic yet. Very unlikely it's gonna be a preview, but I'm probably not gonna be able to do it about Britain again, but we will see. So anyway, so thank you, and